My husband put down the divorce papers with a smile and said, "Accept my mistress or we will break up." I signed the papers without hesitation. My husband turned pale and stammered that I had misunderstood. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a partner who completely underestimated your worth. I looked at the legal documents resting on our marble dining table. Terrence stood across from me wearing a $3,000 suit. "I do not actually want a divorce, Alara," he said using his best courtroom voice. "But Jasmine is pregnant. You have a choice. Accept an open marriage where she is my public partner and you stay in the penthouse. Or sign those papers and leave with nothing. Let us be realistic. You are a 34-year-old lifeless calculator crunching numbers in a cubicle. If you walk out that door, who in Atlanta is going to look twice at a boring tax accountant?" I did not cry or scream. Instead, I pulled my Mont Blanc pen from my purse. I flipped to the last page, found the signature line, and signed my name with a smooth, steady hand. "My lawyer will send the property division addendum tomorrow," I said, my voice completely flat. I put the cap back on my pen and stood up. Terrence froze. The smug smile vanished instantly, replaced by sheer confusion. He stared at my signature as if the ink was poisonous. "No, wait," he stammered. "You misunderstood. I am giving you a chance to save our marriage. You cannot just sign it." I walked past him toward the hallway closet and pulled out the suitcase I had packed hours earlier. "There was no misunderstanding, Terrence. You wanted out, or you wanted a sister wife. I declined the latter, so I am giving you the former." Terrence started breathing heavily. His entire reality was based on the delusion that I desperately needed him. When he racked up $250,000 in law school debt, I quietly paid it off using my own income so he could maintain his pristine credit score. He truly believed my existence revolved around basking in the glow of his legal career. "Alara, you are not thinking straight." He panicked. "You cannot afford to live on your own. You need my income." I grabbed the handle of my suitcase. "I will manage just fine." Terrence rushed forward, grabbing the handle. "You are not leaving," he demanded. "We have the bank meeting on Thursday." Ah, yes, the bank meeting, the real reason behind his panic. Terrence was 2 weeks away from a partnership vote at his corporate law firm. To secure his seat, he needed to buy into the firm with a $2 million loan. Because his personal assets were entirely tied up in our marriage, the bank required a spousal consent signature to approve the loan. Without my signature, his loan would be denied, his promotion revoked, and his career trajectory destroyed. He brought up the divorce papers today as a manipulation tactic. Terrified of losing him, he thought I would accept his mistress and obediently sign his bank documents next week to keep the peace. "I need that signature, Alara," he yelled, dropping his sophisticated lawyer persona. "You owe me that signature. I gave you the best years of my life." "You gave the best years of your life to Jasmine," I corrected him, stepping away. "Since we are getting a divorce, my signature is no longer yours to use. Good luck explaining to the senior partners why your funding fell through." The realization hit him like a blow. Instead of apologizing, his narcissism kicked into overdrive. He pulled his phone from his pocket and glared at me. "You think you can walk away and ruin my career?" He sneered, dialing a number. "I am the primary account holder on our joint accounts. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. You will be begging to come back by tomorrow morning." He put the phone to his ear. "Yes, this is Terrence. I need an immediate freeze on all funds. Nobody withdraws a single cent without my verbal authorization." He hung up the phone, looking at me triumphantly. "Have fun paying for a hotel tonight with $0 in your pocket. You are locked out. You are officially homeless, Alara." I stood by the front door and waited. 5 seconds later, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. It was an automated text alert from our bank, notifying me that a freeze had been placed on our joint checking account. I looked up at Terrence and smiled. "Thank you for handling that. I was meaning to close that account anyway." "What are you talking about?" he demanded. I held up my phone screen so he could see the text alert clearly. The alert showed the exact balance of the account he had just frozen. $14.32. Terrence stared at the number, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Where is the rest of the money?" he asked, dropping to a whisper. "We had over $80,000 in savings. Where is it?" I tucked my phone back into my purse. "It is gone, Terrence. I moved my half of our liquid assets into a private account weeks ago." "You cannot do that," he shouted. "That is marital property. A judge will force you to return it. Actually, a judge will be very interested to know why you spent $40,000 of marital funds on a down payment for a townhouse in Jasmine's name." "I filed the forensic accounting report with my lawyer this morning. I simply recovered what you stole." Terrence was shaking his hands balled into fists. "You are just a boring tax accountant," he spat. "You do not know anything about asset division. You are going to regret this." I stepped out into the hallway. "I might be an accountant, Terrence, but I am definitely not boring." I turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving him standing in the doorway of the penthouse. As the elevator doors closed, I pulled out my phone again. I bypassed the banking app and opened my secure portfolio dashboard. The screen loaded, displaying my actual net worth, $18 million. Terrence thought I spent my days doing simple tax returns for local businesses. He had no idea that 3 years ago I founded an artificial intelligence company that specializes in forensic accounting. My software was currently contracted by federal agencies to track money laundering and corporate fraud. My entire fortune was safely locked away in an irrevocable blind trust I had established 3 months ago, the moment I discovered his affair. Terrence was about to go to war over $14 while I held the keys to a financial empire he could not even comprehend. The Alpha Kappa Alpha Annual Charity Gala was the crown jewel of Atlanta elite society. Pink and green floral arrangements draped across the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel. This was the room where power was concentrated and where careers were silently made or broken over glasses of expensive champagne. I stood near a towering ice sculpture wearing a simple, unbranded black silk dress. My presence here was not a coincidence. The guest list was strictly curated to include federal judges, corporate tycoons, and the senior partners of every major law firm in the city. Donovan needed these exact people to secure his impending promotion. He had spent the last month aggressively networking to impress the older generation of wealthy legal minds who controlled the partnership votes. I watched from a distance as he walked through the double doors of the ballroom. He was wearing a custom velvet tuxedo that I had quietly paid for last year. Clinging to his arm was Sasha. She wore a flashy, sequined gown that screamed for attention. She was 26 years old and desperately eager to prove she belonged in a room full of generational wealth. Donovan scanned the crowd, searching for the managing partners of his firm. His eyes locked onto me, standing alone by the ice sculpture. I saw the familiar narcissistic smirk spread across his face. He leaned down and whispered something into Sasha's ear. Instead of avoiding me, they changed their trajectory and walked directly across the crowded ballroom toward my location. He wanted an audience. He wanted to publicly assert his dominance and parade his new younger partner in front of the very people who held his professional future in their hands. Several guests stopped their conversations to watch the unfolding scene. Atlanta high society thrives on whispered scandals, and a man bringing his pregnant mistress to a gala where his wife is present is the ultimate spectacle. Donovan steered Sasha so close to me that I could smell her overpowering floral perfume. She held a full glass of dark red wine in her right hand. Sasha looked me up and down with an exaggerated expression of pity. She deliberately stepped forward and tilted her wrist. The dark red wine splashed heavily across the front of my black silk dress. The liquid soaked into the fabric instantly. Gasps erupted from the wealthy guests standing nearby. The stains spread like a dark cloud over the elegant fabric, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. My entire life had been spent maintaining composure while dealing with the arrogance of people who thought they were better than me. This moment was no different. The string quartet playing in the background suddenly seemed too quiet. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly sorry!" Sasha announced, her voice artificially loud to ensure everyone in our radius could hear her. "I did not realize you were standing right there, Valerie. But honestly, a little wine might actually improve that cheap mall dress you are wearing. You always were so plain and boring. Donovan told me you never knew how to dress for these high-class events. It is a shame you could not afford anything better on a miserable bookkeeping salary. The elite guests murmured among themselves. Donovan stood tall, radiating arrogant satisfaction. He looked around to make sure the senior partners from his firm were witnessing his triumph. He wanted them to see how easily he could discard a boring tax accountant and upgrade to a younger, more vibrant woman. He thought this public humiliation would break my spirit and force me to retreat into the shadows. I did not flinch. I did not reach for a napkin. I simply looked down at the wine stain and then raised my eyes to meet Sasha directly. My expression remained completely composed. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with a clear, sharp resonance that carried perfectly across the quieted room. "That is a very bold statement, Sasha," I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight. "Especially coming from someone wearing a stolen piece of jewelry." Sasha scoffed and touched her collarbone defensively. "You are just jealous." She laughed loudly. "Donovan bought this for me to celebrate our baby. It is a custom piece." I took one slow step forward. "It is indeed a custom piece," I said smoothly. "It is a rare blue diamond teardrop pendant surrounded by 2 carats of flawless, brilliant cut white diamonds. The jeweler is a private dealer located in the Diamond District of New York City. The purchase price was exactly $80,000. The arrogant smile on Sasha's face began to falter. Donovan stepped forward, his brow furrowing as he tried to understand how I knew the exact specifications and price of the necklace. "It is truly a stunning piece of art." I continued, making sure my voice reached the group of older men standing just a few feet away. Those men were the senior managing partners of Donovan Law Firm. "However, there is a significant problem with that beautiful necklace, Sasha. I am a forensic accountant, and my job is to track where money originates." The whispers in the ballroom completely stopped. The silence was absolute. I looked directly at the senior partners and then back to Sasha. The $80,000 used to purchase that blue diamond did not come from Donovan's personal bank account. I stated clearly. He does not have that kind of liquidity because he spends every cent he earns trying to maintain a fake image of wealth. The funds were wired directly from the law firm interest on lawyers' trust accounts. That is the secured escrow fund where the firm holds settlement money belonging to their clients. Donovan illegally authorized a wire transfer from the client escrow account directly to the New York jeweler. Donovan's face drained of all color. His eyes darted frantically toward the senior partners who were now staring at him in sheer horror. I memorized the serial number engraved on the clasp of that necklace. I continued, my voice echoing in the silent ballroom. "It matches the exact item listed as physical collateral in an active federal investigation for wire fraud and embezzlement. You are currently wearing $80,000 of stolen client money around your neck, Sasha. By displaying it publicly at a charity gala surrounded by the legal community, you have just made yourself an accessory to a federal crime." Sasha turned completely pale. Her hands began to tremble so violently that her empty wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the marble floor. She looked at Donovan, expecting him to aggressively deny the accusation and defend her honor. Donovan was incapable of speaking. He was paralyzed. The managing partners of his prestigious law firm placed their drinks on the nearest table and began walking purposefully toward our circle. Their faces were grim and furious. They realized instantly that if one of their lawyers was embezzling from the client trust accounts, the entire firm was facing a catastrophic federal audit and potential disbarment. I reached into my small clutch and pulled out a simple white cocktail napkin. I carefully wiped a single drop of wine from my wrist. I did not look at Donovan or his trembling mistress again. The social hierarchy he had desperately tried to conquer had just witnessed his absolute professional destruction. I turned my back on the shattered glass and walked gracefully toward the exit, leaving Donovan surrounded by the furious partners of his collapsing career. Donovan's hand clamped around my upper arm like a steel vice the moment I stepped past the velvet ropes of the grand ballroom. His grip was bruising, a physical manifestation of the panic and rage boiling beneath his expensive tuxedo. He did not say a word as he yanked me down the dimly lit corridor of the St. Regis Hotel, away from the whispering crowds and the judging eyes of Atlanta high society. His breathing was heavy, erratic, and completely out of rhythm with the polished image he had spent years cultivating. He shoved open a pair of heavy mahogany doors leading into a private VIP lounge reserved for platinum donors. The room was empty, smelling faintly of expensive bourbon and fresh lilies. Donovan pushed me inside and slammed the doors shut behind us. The heavy wood muffled the sounds of the string quartet playing in the main hall, trapping us in a suffocating silence. "What is wrong with you?" he hissed, pacing the length of the oriental rug like a cornered predator. His chest heaved as he ran a hand over his face, smearing the light layer of sweat forming on his forehead. "You just destroyed months of networking, Valerie. You humiliated me in front of the senior partners. You made up some insane lie about Sasha necklace just because you are bitter and jealous that I am moving on with a younger woman." I stood near a leather armchair, smoothing out the unstained side of my black silk dress. My heart rate remained completely steady. I did not rub my arm where he had grabbed me because showing any sign of physical discomfort would only feed his desperate need for control. "It was not a lie, Donovan," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and calm. "The serial number matches the Federal Registry. You stole from the client trust accounts and you used the money to buy jewelry for a paralegal." He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You listen to me very carefully, you pathetic little bookkeeper." He threatened, his voice dropping into a menacing register that he usually reserved for intimidating opposing counsel in the courtroom. "You are going to walk back out there right now and tell everyone you had a mental breakdown. You are going to say you drank too much champagne and hallucinated the whole thing out of spite. If you do not fix this immediately, I swear to you, Valerie, I will make sure you never work in the city of Atlanta again." I tilted my head slightly, watching him unravel. "You think you have the power to blacklist me?" I asked, genuinely curious to see how deep his delusions ran. "I am a corporate lawyer at one of the most powerful firms in the state," Donovan snarled, taking a step closer to me. "I have dinner with the men who own the financial institutions you scrub spreadsheets for. Who do you think stopped you from getting that senior director promotion at your last accounting firm 3 years ago?" The room felt entirely still. I looked at him, processing the casual cruelty of his confession. He was so blinded by his own anger that he was handing me the missing puzzle pieces of my past. "You sabotaged my promotion," I stated, maintaining my neutral expression. Donovan laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. "Of course I did," he admitted without a single ounce of remorse. "Your managing director played golf with my boss. I had one quiet drink with him and simply suggested that you lacked the leadership skills to handle a director role. I told him you were fragile and prone to anxiety. The very next week, they gave the promotion to that guy from your department instead. You belonged at home, supporting my career, not trying to compete with me. I was the one meant to be the breadwinner. You were supposed to stay in your place." The sheer magnitude of his narcissism was breathtaking. For years, I had blamed myself for missing out on career advancements. I had worked late nights, taken on extra client portfolios, and studied advanced tax codes, while my own husband was secretly having drinks with my bosses to ensure I remained subordinate to his ego. He needed me to feel small so he could feel large. If I could do that to you back then, imagine what I can do to you now. Donovan threatened, stepping fully into my personal space. "I will make one phone call and every accounting firm in Georgia will throw your resume in the trash. You will be lucky to find a job doing payroll for a fast food restaurant. You will have absolutely nothing. No career, no money, and no husband. You are going to march out there and apologize to Sasha and my partners right now." I did not step back. I held my ground and let a slow, deliberate smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile that comes from knowing you hold the winning hand in a high-stakes game. "I am not apologizing to anyone, Donovan," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy whisper. "And you are not going to make any phone calls because your career is already over." Before Donovan could open his mouth to unleash another wave of threats, the heavy mahogany doors of the VIP room clicked open. The brass handles turned, and the heavy wood swung wide, revealing a tall, distinguished man with silver hair. It was the supreme managing partner of Donovan Law Firm, a man known for his ruthless standards and immense power within the legal community. Donovan's posture instantly shifted. The aggressive predator vanished, replaced immediately by the fawning, obedient employee. He plastered a fake, apologetic smile on his face and stepped quickly away from me. "Sir, I am so sorry about that scene out there." Donovan began, his voice dripping with artificial respect and panic. "My wife is simply going through a very difficult emotional phase right now regarding our separation. She made up those ridiculous accusations because she is not in her right mind. I assure you I will handle this private matter immediately." The managing partner did not even look at Donovan. His eyes completely bypassed his desperate employee and landed directly on me. He walked past Donovan as if he were nothing more than a piece of furniture and stopped right in front of me. The older man extended his hand with a look of deep professional respect. "Valerie," he said, his tone warm and deferential, "I am so glad I finally managed to track you down tonight. I know this gala is supposed to be a social event, but I really need a brief update. Has your team at Aegis Ledger finished the preliminary compliance review on our escrow accounts yet? The board is extremely anxious to see your findings." I reached out and shook the managing partner hand firmly, completely ignoring the suffocating silence that had just fallen over the room. "My analysts are finalizing the data rendering right now," I replied smoothly, keeping my tone purely professional. "We have uncovered several highly concerning, unauthorized wire transfers originating from your internal trust system. My lead investigator will have the full federal disclosure report sitting on your desk by 8 o'clock Monday morning." The managing partner nodded, looking immensely relieved. "Thank you, Valerie. Your firm is the best in the business. Having Aegis Ledger handle this federal audit is the only thing keeping the Justice Department off our backs right now. We trust your software implicitly." Donovan stood completely frozen in the center of the room. His mouth was slightly open, his breathing shallow and rapid. His eyes darted wildly from his highly respected boss to me, and then back again. His brain was violently struggling to process the reality of what he had just heard. The massive forensic accounting firm that held the fate of his entire law firm in its hands, the elite company that the managing partners were begging for salvation, did not belong to a stranger. It belonged to the boring tax accountant he had just threatened to destroy. He slowly realized that his boss answered to his wife. The heavy mahogany doors of the VIP lounge clicked shut behind me as I stepped back out into the long, carpeted corridor. I walked with measured, deliberate steps toward the grand marble restrooms located near the east wing of the building. Before I could even dispense the soap, the heavy restroom door swung open violently. Sasha stormed inside, her sequined gown rustling loudly against the quiet, tiled room. Her face was flushed an angry red and her chest heaved with erratic breaths. She marched straight toward me, stopping only a few inches from where I was calmly washing my hands. "You think you are so smart, Valerie," Sasha hissed, her voice echoing sharply off the mirrored walls. "You think throwing a tantrum and making up lies about my necklace will make Donovan come running back to you? You are completely delusional. He does not want you anymore. He wants me and he wants our baby." I kept my eyes fixed on the running water, watching the soap bubbles swirl and disappear down the drain. He is finally going to have the real family he always deserved. Sasha continued, leaning closer to my reflection in the mirror. "He told me everything about you, Valerie. He told me how you could never give him an heir. He said you were physically broken and completely useless as a wife. He loves this unborn child more than he ever loved you. He is going to leave you with absolutely nothing and build a brand new life with me because I am actually capable of giving him what he desperately needs." Her cruel words hung heavily in the sterile air of the restroom. I turned off the brass faucet and reached for a crisp white hand towel. As I dried my hands, I let my mind briefly revisit the profound dark agony of my past. For 5 excruciating years, Donovan had systematically used our severe infertility struggles as a primary weapon to mentally break me down. He had mercilessly blamed my body for our inability to conceive a child. He spent countless nights pacing our bedroom telling me that my stressful accounting career was ruining my biological clock. He intentionally made me feel completely inadequate and utterly defective as a woman. He used the absence of a child as his ultimate justification to treat me with profound coldness and escalating disrespect. I had spent thousands of hours crying in empty medical clinics, undergoing highly invasive, painful fertility treatments, while he conveniently stayed late at the office. He had weaponized my deepest personal tragedy to completely mask his own fundamental toxic flaws. I carefully tossed the damp white towel into the brass wastebasket and turned to face Sasha directly. "That is an incredibly fascinating story, Sasha," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and chillingly smooth. "It is truly amazing how easily Donovan constructs elaborate fictions to manipulate the naive women he sleeps with. He desperately needed a convenient excuse to rush the divorce, and you eagerly provided him with the perfect narrative." Sasha tightened her grip on her stomach and glared at me with absolute hatred. "It is not a narrative, you bitter old woman." She spat her eyes wide with unhinged malice. "I am 10 weeks pregnant with his child. We already picked out a name and we are finalizing the nursery in our new townhouse." I reached into my small black silk clutch and let my fingers brush against a thick folded manila envelope. I slowly pulled the envelope out and placed it gently on the pristine marble counter, right between the 2 gold sinks. "You are not 10 weeks pregnant, Sasha," I stated, my tone dropping to a clinical detached register. Sasha's face instantly drained of all its angry color. Her hand slowly slipped away from her stomach as she stared at the manila envelope resting on the cold marble. "My forensic accounting software is sophisticated, Sasha," I continued, never breaking eye contact with her terrified reflection. "When Aegis Ledger conducts a federal compliance audit, we do not just track the massive fraudulent wire transfers, we track absolutely every single microtransaction associated with the stolen client funds. We follow the digital footprints wherever they lead." The $200,000 Donovan illegally siphoned from the firm escrow accounts was fragmented. I explained, methodically outlining the indisputable facts. $80,000 went directly to the Diamond District in New York for that stolen necklace you are wearing. $40,000 went directly to the residential property group for the down payment on your new townhouse. And exactly $15,420 was wired directly to a premier cosmetic surgery center located right here in Midtown Atlanta. Sasha opened her mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. "The documents inside this envelope are highly detailed medical billing records," I said, pushing the folder slightly closer to her trembling hands. "They explicitly outline the specific elective cosmetic procedures you underwent exactly 4 weeks ago. You used stolen federal trust money to completely pay for extensive liposuction and a full-body contouring procedure. It is biologically impossible for you to be 10 weeks pregnant when you were under heavy general anesthesia receiving elective cosmetic surgery just last month." She began to hyperventilate, her chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow gasps. She looked at the bathroom doors and then back at the medical documents, her fabricated reality shattering into a million sharp pieces. "You deliberately falsified a pregnancy to force Donovan to accelerate his divorce timeline," I stated, watching her completely unravel. "You desperately knew he was incredibly vulnerable about his lack of a legacy, and you weaponized that exact vulnerability to trap him. Unfortunately for you, Donovan is currently facing 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud, and you are now officially documented as the primary financial beneficiary of his embezzlement scheme." I picked up my small black clutch and walked calmly toward the restroom exit. I did not offer her a single ounce of pity or comfort. "I highly suggest you find a very good defense attorney, Sasha," I said softly as I reached for the brass handle of the door. "Because when Donovan discovers you lied about the baby, he is going to throw you directly under the federal bus to save himself." I walked gracefully in the opposite direction, leaving them to face the ruins of their toxic lies. The conference room at the downtown Legal Deposition Center felt intentionally cold and incredibly sterile. Fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead, casting a harsh pale glow across the massive thick glass table that physically separated me from the man I was legally bound to. Donovan sat directly across from me, looking exceptionally profoundly arrogant. He had intentionally traded his usual bespoke tuxedo for a dark navy pinstripe suit that loudly screamed corporate intimidation and absolute legal dominance. Sitting directly beside him was his highly aggressive, sleazy divorce attorney, a balding man named Lawrence, who had purposefully built an entire lucrative career out of legally bankrupting vulnerable women during high-conflict divorces. My own legal counsel, a sharp, meticulous woman named Diane, sat quietly to my right, casually organizing an incredibly thick stack of manila folders without a single ounce of visible concern. Donovan leaned far back in his leather ergonomic chair and laced his fingers together in a tight, arrogant knot. He looked at me with an expression of pure, malicious, unadulterated triumph. He genuinely, absolutely believed he had successfully backed me into an inescapable corner after our extremely volatile confrontation at my parents' estate last week. His entire legal strategy today was explicitly, specifically designed to leave me absolutely destitute and crawling back to him on my knees begging for basic financial mercy. Lawrence loudly cleared his throat and dramatically opened a sleek black leather binder. Let us move directly to the pressing matter of business assets and independent revenue streams. He began, his voice dripping with heavy condescension and practiced legal superiority. My client is formally, aggressively asserting his absolute legal right to exactly 50% of your independent bookkeeping practice, Valerie. Under Georgia state law, any business form developed or scaled during the act of marriage is automatically considered joint marital property subject to equal division. We are legally demanding full immediate liquidation and an immediate 50% cash payout of your entire active client roster and all outstanding accounts receivable. I maintained my perfectly neutral expression, keeping my hands resting calmly and loosely on my lap. I looked directly into Donovan's smug eyes. "You actually want half of my business?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly entirely flat and void of any fear. "You confidently told absolutely everyone my entire career was a pathetic, embarrassing waste of time. You actively spent years telling my parents and my brother that I was just a boring little tax accountant who quietly scrubbed boring spreadsheets for absolute pennies. Why would you possibly want any part of such a completely worthless, insignificant endeavor now?" Donovan let out a loud, incredibly patronizing laugh that sharply echoed in the sterile, quiet room. "Because it belongs to me, Valerie," he stated confidently, leaning forward and resting his elbows heavily on the cold glass table. "You would not even have that sad, pathetic little bookkeeping practice if it were not for my endless, extreme generosity. You are completely, utterly delusional if you honestly think you built absolutely anything by yourself without my massive financial backing." Diane deliberately paused her diligent note-taking and looked straight up at him. "Please fully elaborate on that statement for the official legal record, Donovan." She requested, her voice dangerously, incredibly calm and polite. "How exactly did you personally financially fund my client independent business venture?" Donovan sat up much straighter, eagerly, excitedly taking the bait Diane had just gracefully offered him. "I am the sole absolute reason she was ever able to start taking on independent local clients," he proudly declared, gesturing vaguely and dismissively toward where I was sitting. "Exactly 5 years ago, her old cheap computer completely died. She sat on our living room couch sobbing uncontrollably about how she absolutely could not afford to replace it because she was so incredibly terrible at managing her own personal finances. I benevolently took pity on her pathetic situation. I drove to a local electronics store and I graciously used my own hard-earned elite corporate salary to buy her a brand new $500 laptop. That specific laptop was the absolute fundamental foundation of her entire pathetic little business operation. I basically generously gave her the exact tools she desperately needed to survive in the professional world. Therefore, I am entirely, completely, legally entitled to half of whatever meager, insignificant profits she has managed to scrape together doing basic, easy tax returns for local bakeries and neighborhood nail salons. The sheer absolute audacity of his completely delusional savior complex was genuinely physically staggering to witness. He had completely, entirely rewritten our entire financial history to paint himself as my generous, wealthy benefactor. He conveniently purposefully left out the massive, undeniable factual reality that I could not possibly afford a new laptop back then because my entire bi-weekly paycheck was being automatically diverted to aggressively pay off his massive, crippling law school debt. I had willingly sacrificed my own basic essential needs to ensure he could confidently walk around Atlanta endlessly, pretending to be a self-made, brilliant legal genius who achieved success entirely on his own merit. Lawrence sharply tapped his expensive metal pen against the glass table, loudly demanding our immediate attention. The financial origin of the business equipment is clearly perfectly established on the legal record now, he stated incredibly smugly, flashing a wicked grin. My client independently provided the crucial seed capital for the business. We are absolutely not leaving this deposition room today until we have a signed, legally binding explicit agreement granting Donovan full unrestricted access to exactly 50% of your business accounts. If you stubbornly refuse to sign this mandate, Valerie, we will gladly, happily drag you through a brutal, incredibly public trial and completely drain whatever tiny, pathetic savings you have left on massively expensive, endless litigation fees. I slowly, calmly turned my head to look directly at Diane. She did not look intimidated or worried in the slightest. She looked absolutely, entirely thrilled by their aggressive, arrogant demands. Diane calmly, gracefully reached into the thick, organized stack of manila folders she had been preparing all morning. She smoothly pulled out a single, perfectly crisp legal document securely bound in a heavy blue cover. We absolutely, entirely agree that Donovan is legally, completely entitled to 50% of the business under the current specific marital property division laws, Diane stated smoothly, confidently, pushing the heavy document across the long, clear glass table. In fact, my client has explicitly directly instructed me to completely immediately surrender the ownership division documents without a single solitary argument or delay. We are more than happy to give you exactly precisely what you are aggressively demanding today on the record. Lawrence looked highly, incredibly suspicious for a brief, fleeting moment. But his natural intense legal greed quickly overtook his standard professional caution. He eagerly, greedily snatched the blue folder directly from the table and rapidly flipped it open. Donovan immediately leaned heavily over his lawyer's shoulder, a massive, triumphant, greedy grin rapidly spreading across his arrogant face. He was eagerly, desperately waiting to see exactly how many thousands of dollars he could viciously extract from my accounts just to severely punish me for daring to leave him and Sasha. I watched Donovan face very closely, intently, as his eyes quickly scanned the first detailed page of the legal ownership document. His smug, incredibly triumphant smile slowly, gradually began to falter and crack. His brow furrowed deeply as his eyes darted rapidly back and forth across the crisp, heavy black text. He blinked rapidly, repeatedly, attempting to logically process the heavy, complex legal jargon and the very specific corporate entity names prominently listed on the official binding transfer agreement. "What exactly is this?" Donovan asked, his voice suddenly rapidly losing all of its aggressive, booming, absolute confidence. "This document does not say Valerie Independent Accounting Services. This explicitly says Aegis Ledger Incorporated." What in the world is an Aegis Ledger? Lawrence's eyes widened massively in sheer horror as he frantically flipped to the second page of the heavy document. The sleazy, arrogant lawyer face instantly drained of absolutely all color as he read the certified federal financial valuation firmly attached to the ownership transfer agreement. Lawrence's hands began to tremble so incredibly violently that the thick, crisp paper audibly loudly rattled in the completely quiet, sterile conference room. Diane leaned forward casually, resting her forearms on the glass table. Aegis Ledger Incorporated is the official registered corporate name of my client, highly successful business. She explained, her voice echoing with absolute, undeniable authority. It is an elite, highly specialized artificial intelligence firm focusing exclusively on highly advanced federal forensic accounting and tracking. Donovan stared at me, his mouth hanging slightly open in pure shock. His brain was violently, aggressively struggling to comprehend the massive, unprecedented shift in his reality. But she only does local simple tax returns, he whispered, staring blankly, helplessly at the complex paperwork. I looked directly, deeply into his panicked, terrified eyes. I have not done a basic simple tax return in over 5 years, Donovan. I stated, my voice ringing with icy, absolute clarity. My highly advanced software is currently exclusively contracted by the United States Department of Justice to actively track complex, elite corporate money laundering operations. Lawrence completely dropped the blue folder onto the glass table, as if it were literally physically burning his trembling fingers. He looked slowly at Donovan with an expression of pure, unadulterated professional terror. Donovan slowly, shakily reached out and pulled the heavy document directly toward himself. His wide eyes finally landed heavily on the certified financial valuation page that his terrified lawyer had just silently read. He stared intensely at the bold black numbers printed clearly, explicitly at the bottom of the page. The massive digits seemed to physically strike him across the face. He blinked again and again, desperately trying to force the enormous numbers to change back into something small and highly insignificant. $200 million! Donovan finally breathed out, his voice cracking instantly into a high-pitched, breathless wheeze. This federal valuation explicitly says the company is completely worth $200 million. Diane offered him an incredibly sharp, predatory, terrifying smile. That is absolutely precisely correct, Donovan, she confirmed crisply without missing a beat. And you just aggressively, legally, irrevocably demanded exactly 50% of it on the official federal deposition record. Donovan looked up at me, his eyes wide with a sudden, manic, absolute, terrifying elation. The sudden realization that he might suddenly, immediately be legally entitled to $100 million completely, utterly erased his initial shock. His overwhelming, boundless greed instantly, entirely blinded him to the massive, looming dark shadow of his own impending absolute destruction. He had absolutely no earthly idea what claiming that specific 50% would actually truly cost him today. Donovan stared at the printed valuation page with a manic gleam in his dark eyes. The sterile conference room suddenly felt electrically charged by his overwhelming, unadulterated greed. He completely ignored the pale, terrified expression on the face of his attorney, Lawrence. The massive number printed on the crisp white paper had completely short-circuited his rational brain. $100 million. He whispered the words like a sacred, desperate prayer. His chest puffed out and his posture instantly transformed from aggressive intimidation to pure, euphoric arrogance. He slapped his hand down hard on the thick glass table, making the expensive metal pens rattle loudly against the surface. I always knew I was destined for this level of extreme elite wealth, Donovan loudly declared, completely forgetting that he had absolutely nothing to do with building my highly successful company. He honestly believed his mere presence in my life entitled him to the massive fruits of my silent, exhausting labor. Sasha was waiting impatiently just outside in the reception area. Donovan practically sprinted to the heavy glass doors and yanked them open with massive, frantic energy. He pulled his paralegal mistress into the formal deposition room, completely disregarding all standard, strict legal protocols. Sasha stumbled inside, looking highly confused, but her eyes quickly lit up when she saw Donovan practically vibrating with manic joy. "We did it, baby," Donovan shouted, pulling her into a tight, arrogant embrace right in front of me and my attorney. "She is worth $200 million, and we just legally took half of it on the official federal record." Sasha gasped loudly and covered her mouth with both hands. Her eyes darted toward me, filled with a toxic, incredibly dark mixture of malicious triumph and raw, unfiltered greed. Donovan immediately began aggressively bragging about exactly how he was going to spend my hard-earned money. "We are buying a massive custom yacht tomorrow morning," he boasted loudly, pacing the small room with frantic, energetic strides. "I want a gigantic tri-deck luxury vessel permanently docked in Miami. We will fly down on a private jet this weekend to look at the most expensive luxury listings." Sasha giggled loudly and leaned heavily against his arm, feeding directly into his massive, delusional ego. "We can get the newest luxury Range Rover too," she purred, running her fingers down the lapel of his dark navy pinstripe suit. Donovan nodded enthusiastically, entirely lost in his own fantasy. "Whatever you want, baby," he promised, completely blinded by his own toxic vanity. He viewed the staggering amount of money as his ultimate rightful prize for simply existing. He looked at Sasha not with genuine love or real affection, but simply as a shiny, new, expensive accessory to perfectly complement his sudden, massive, perceived wealth. He desperately needed her to constantly validate his distorted, twisted reality, where he was always the brilliant, conquering hero, and I was just the pathetic, boring loser he easily defeated. I sat perfectly still and watched them celebrate my absolute perceived ruin. My lawyer, Diane, sat quietly beside me, her hands resting calmly on top of her thick, organized stack of manila folders. She let Donovan completely indulge in his wild, arrogant fantasies for several long, uninterrupted minutes. She purposefully allowed him to fully, firmly, legally cement his absolute ownership claim on the official audio recording of the federal deposition. Lawrence, however, was desperately, frantically tugging at Donovan's sleeve, trying to get his erratic client to sit back down and shut up. The sleazy divorce attorney was sweating profusely, completely soaking his shirt collar. His vast legal experience was finally screaming at him that something was terribly, fatally wrong. Nobody gracefully, willingly hands over $100 million without a single fight. Lawrence knew deep in his bones they had just walked blindly into a massive, devastating trap, but he could not figure out how the metal jaws were going to snap shut. Diane finally cleared her throat. The soft, subtle sound easily sliced right through Donovan. Loud, arrogant bragging. Donovan paused and looked down at my lawyer with a look of pure, dripping condescension. "What is it, Diane?" he asked mockingly, crossing his arms over his chest. "Do you need a moment to console your completely ruined, highly pathetic client?" Diane offered him a slow, terrifying, absolutely predatory smile. She casually reached out and tapped the heavy blue legal document resting on the glass table directly in front of him. "You only read the first page, Donovan," she stated, her voice completely smooth and dangerously calm. "I highly recommend you eagerly turn to the second page of the ownership transfer agreement you just so aggressively signed and officially ratified." Donovan scoffed loudly but arrogantly flipped the heavy, crisp page over. Lawrence immediately leaned in so close, his sweating forehead nearly touched the cold glass, trying desperately to read the dense, complex legal text. "By legally claiming exactly 50% active ownership of Aegis Ledger Incorporated, you have officially legally bound yourself to the strict corporate bylaws of the entire enterprise." Diane explained meticulously, her words echoing loudly in the completely quiet room. "Specifically Section 4, regarding active fiduciary liability and total federal compliance mandates." Sasha stopped giggling instantly and took a slow, nervous step backward toward the exit. Donovan squinted hard at the complex legal jargon, his euphoric smile slowly starting to slip from his face. "What exactly does this mean?" he asked, his voice suddenly rapidly losing a huge fraction of its booming absolute confidence. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the cold glass table, and looked directly deeply into his panicked, terrified eyes. "It means, Donovan, that as an active equal owner of a specialized elite federal contracting firm, you are now totally, personally, legally liable for all active compliance audits we are currently executing," I stated, my voice ringing with icy, absolute clarity. "Aegis Ledger is not just any random local tech company. We are the exact specific federal forensic contractor currently actively auditing your entire corporate law firm." The remaining color completely drained from Donovan's face. His hands began to tremble so incredibly violently, he dropped the heavy blue folder back onto the glass table with a loud smack. Lawrence let out a loud, sharp gasp and buried his pale, sweating face in both of his hands. The sleazy lawyer instantly entirely understood the massive, catastrophic magnitude of the legal trap they had just eagerly sprinted into. I did not break eye contact with Donovan for a single second. My top investigators are currently aggressively tracking a massive, highly complex $12 million racketeering and money laundering scheme deeply embedded within your firm internal client trust accounts. I continued my tone completely ruthless and utterly detached. And by aggressively officially forcing me to grant you 50% ownership of the auditing firm today, you just legally, explicitly signed a binding federal document totally waiving your absolute right to spousal privilege. Donovan stumbled backward heavily, his legs suddenly giving out completely beneath his tall frame. He hit the hard edge of a leather chair and collapsed heavily into it, looking entirely broken. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but his vocal cords absolutely refused to produce a single sound. Sasha stared at him in pure, unadulterated horror, slowly fully realizing the massive yacht and the luxury cars were completely gone before she even got to touch them. "You honestly thought you were cleverly, brilliantly bankrupting me, Donovan," I said softly, leaning back comfortably in my chair. "But in your blind, desperate, arrogant, all-consuming greed, you just willingly, enthusiastically placed yourself directly in the absolute center of a massive federal Justice Department firing line. Your own highly aggressive legal demand just single-handedly, completely destroyed your entire legal defense strategy." The official deposition tape sat on the table, capturing every single word of his eager, arrogant acceptance. Donovan was now permanently legally bound to the very same intense federal investigation that was about to completely systematically dismantle his entire toxic, pathetic life. The coffee shop in Buckhead was completely empty except for me sitting quietly in a secluded leather booth. Rain lashed against the tinted windows, matching the chaotic energy of the man who suddenly burst through the doors. My older brother Malik stumbled inside looking terrible. His pristine designer wardrobe was replaced by a wrinkled sweatshirt and faded jeans. His eyes darted wildly until they landed on me. He sprinted across the wooden floor and slid aggressively into the booth directly across from my seat. His hands were shaking so violently that he had to press them flat against the tabletop just to keep steady. "Valerie, you have to help me right now," Malik pleaded, his voice cracking as nervous sweat formed across his forehead. "My entire life is falling apart, and you are the only person who has the financial power to stop it. Brittany drained every single one of our joint bank accounts this morning. The federal auditors showed up at her luxury boutique yesterday exactly like you said they would. They confiscated all the inventory and locked down the building. She took whatever cash was left and disappeared. I desperately need a massive bailout. I need $200,000 right this second just to retain a federal defense attorney and keep myself out of prison." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. "You marched into my hotel room yesterday morning and demanded that I get back together with a man who was actively destroying my life," I stated, keeping my tone perfectly smooth. "Your arrogant wife insulted my career, calling me a pathetic, boring tax accountant. You enthusiastically agreed with her toxic microaggressions to appease her fragile ego. Why on earth would you logically think I would ever willingly hand you a single dime of my wealth?" Malik buried his face in his trembling hands, letting out a pathetic, desperate sob. "Because I am your brother, Valerie," he cried, abandoning his false masculine pride. "We are family, and you have millions of dollars safely in your accounts. You can easily save me from absolute ruin without even feeling the financial loss. I know I was a terrible brother to you, but I was completely trapped." Donovan forced me to stay perfectly quiet about everything. I leaned forward, resting my arms carefully on the table. "What exactly did Donovan force you to stay quiet about, Malik?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerously low pitch. Malik swallowed hard, refusing to make direct eye contact. "I knew about Sasha for over a year. he confessed, his voice dropping to a shameful whisper. I knew he was parading her around Atlanta while you were sitting at home alone scrubbing spreadsheets. I caught them having dinner together at a steakhouse last spring, and Donovan pulled me aside before I could leave. He told me that if I ever breathed a single word of his affair to you, he would instantly cut off my personal funding. I stared at my brother, processing the sickening depth of his profound cowardice. You willingly let my husband publicly humiliate me and blatantly cheat on me? I asked, entirely devoid of any shock. And what exactly was the precise price of your complete silence, Malik? The lease payments on my 2 luxury Mercedes SUVs. He admitted, practically choking on his own words. And my expensive monthly membership dues at the elite country club. Brittany desperately needed to constantly present a wealthy image to her white friends in Buckhead to keep her boutique relevant. We were drowning in massive debt trying to keep up with the lifestyle. Donovan quietly paid those massive bills for me every single month in exchange for my absolute loyalty to him. I needed the money, Valerie. I was incredibly weak and I desperately needed the status. I looked at the miserable broken man sitting across from me. He had willingly sacrificed my mental health, my marriage, and my basic human dignity just so he could comfortably drive a luxury car he could not actually afford. There was absolutely no rage left inside me. There was only pure, absolute clinical detachment. I reached into my black leather purse. I did not pull out a checkbook. Instead, I pulled out a cheap, thick plastic prepaid burner phone. I deliberately slid the small black device across the smooth wooden table, stopping right exactly in front of his trembling hands. I am absolutely not giving you $200,000, Malik, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute finality. But because we indeed share the same DNA, I am going to graciously give you something vastly more valuable today. I am going to give you exactly one single chance to save yourself. Press the play button on the audio file glowing on the screen. Malik slowly reached out with a shaking finger and pressed the green button. The audio quality was slightly muffled, but the voices were incredibly, undeniably clear. It was his wife Brittany speaking frantically, breathlessly to her personal trainer. I packed the last 2 designer suitcases and moved the remaining $70,000 to the offshore account just like you instructed, baby. Brittany's voice echoed from the small speaker, sounding thrilled and incredibly relieved. Malik is completely losing his mind right now, looking for the money. He is so utterly stupid. I explicitly put his exact legal signature on every single one of those fraudulent corporate tax returns for the boutique. When the federal investigators finish auditing the books, the entire massive paper trail will lead directly straight to him. The IRS will fully believe he was the sole criminal mastermind behind the entire money laundering operation. My flight to Paris leaves from Terminal E tonight at exactly 8 o'clock. I will meet you at the luxury lounge by the gate. We are finally completely free of him. The audio recording abruptly ended, leaving a thick, suffocating, silent void in the room. Malik sat completely, entirely frozen in his booth. His skin had turned the color of pale chalk. His mouth hung wide open as the absolute, devastating reality of his wife's profound, ultimate betrayal brutally, violently crashed down upon him. The woman he had betrayed his own sister to financially support was currently gleefully framing him for massive federal tax fraud while fleeing the country with another man. I reached out and smoothly took the burner phone back from the wooden table. I stood up, grabbing my purse and looking down at the utterly broken man who used to be my older brother. It is currently exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I stated, calmly checking my watch. Your totally faithful, devoted wife boards an international flight to Europe in exactly 6 hours. You have exactly 1 single hour to walk directly into the FBI field office downtown and voluntarily completely turn state evidence against her and Donovan. If you run right now and tell the federal prosecutors absolutely everything you know about the fake invoices and the stolen retirement funds, they might graciously offer you a lenient plea deal. If you hesitate or try to protect her, you will absolutely spend the next 20 years rotting in a federal penitentiary, taking the full absolute fall for her crimes. The clock is officially ticking, Malik. I turned my back on his shattered, weeping form and walked gracefully out of the coffee shop, leaving him to frantically, desperately scramble for his own miserable survival. The summons to my parents' estate in Cascade Heights arrived shortly after I walked out of that luxury hotel restroom. My mother did not ask about my well-being. She simply demanded my immediate presence. When I pulled into the circular driveway, the absurdity of my family dynamics settled heavily over my shoulders. This massive brick house was a physical monument to their relentless obsession with social status within the affluent Black community of Atlanta. They had spent decades sacrificing true family connection just to maintain the flawless illusion of generational wealth. The atmosphere inside the house was suffocating. My parents sat stiffly on cream-colored sofas. My brother Malik nervously paced the rug while his white wife Brittany sat weeping fake tears. Brittany drove straight here after the federal auditors locked down her fraudulent boutique. Instead of taking responsibility, she played the terrified victim. "Sit down, Valerie," my father Calvin ordered, pointing to an uncomfortable accent chair placed in the center of the room. I remained standing. "I am assuming this dramatic emergency gathering has nothing to do with my emotional well-being," I stated calmly. "This has everything to do with your selfish, reckless behavior," my mother snapped. "Donovan just called your father in absolute panic. He told us you are maliciously trying to destroy his prestigious legal career with some fabricated financial audit. He said you are actively working with the federal government to have him wrongfully arrested just because he recently made a simple marital mistake." A simple marital mistake. I repeated the offensive words out loud. My husband stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own vulnerable legal clients to fund cosmetic surgery for his paralegal mistress. Brittany instantly let out a loud, fake sob. "You are destroying our entire perfectly good family over your petty, bitter jealousy, Valerie," she cried, wiping completely dry eyes. "Because of your vicious accounting stunt, the IRS has entirely frozen all of my boutique business accounts. Malik and I are going to lose everything." I looked directly at my older brother Malik. The spineless coward completely avoided my gaze and stared at the expensive rug. He was perfectly content, letting his aggressive white wife entirely blame me for the massive, deliberate financial fraud they willingly committed using Donovan's stolen client money. "Your father and I have already discussed the absolute best solution to this public mess," my mother stated, adjusting her diamond earrings. "You are going to formally drop this malicious divorce immediately today and halt whatever bogus audit your company is running on Donovan Law Firm. Why would you possibly ever want your only biological daughter to remain legally married to an emotionally abusive federal criminal?" I asked genuinely, wanting to hear their twisted, logical reasoning. "Because Donovan reached out and made us a highly generous financial promise this morning," my father eagerly answered, his deep voice booming with artificial, arrogant authority. "He gave us his strict word that the very second you formally drop the divorce and clear his stellar name, he will personally pay off the entire massive remaining balance of our currently ballooning underwater mortgage. He is going straight to the bank to write a certified check to permanently save this historic family estate from immediate devastating foreclosure." The incredibly ugly, bitter truth freely spilled out onto the polished hardwood floor. My own parents were actively willingly selling me right back to my horrible abuser, strictly just to save their secretly crumbling, pathetic financial facade. "I am absolutely not dropping the divorce," I said, maintaining steady, unwavering eye contact. "Donovan is going to federal prison and Brittany is going to be indicted for tax fraud." My father stood up abruptly, his face turning a dark shade of furious red. "If you walk out that door and refuse to fix this situation, you are completely, permanently cut out of this family forever," he shouted violently. "I am legally rewriting the entire family will this afternoon. Malik and Brittany will rightfully inherit this massive historic estate." The severe ultimate threat of total financial disinheritance hung heavily in the highly tense, utterly silent indoor air. Malik finally looked up from the rug. a tiny, greedy spark of false hope suddenly lighting up his cowardly eyes at the mere prospect of solely inheriting the massive multi-million-dollar house. I gently tilted my head back and smoothly let out a slow, incredibly genuine, chilling, dark laugh. You legally actually cannot ever cut me out of the family. Will just to eagerly leave this massive house to Malik. I slowly said, my smooth voice dropping to a dangerously calm, icy whisper. I casually reached my hand deeply into my structured black leather tote bag and calmly pulled out a thick, certified official legal document. It is the absolute master legal deed to this massive historic estate. I smoothly explained, watching my arrogant father face rapidly begin to completely drain of its furious red color. You both love constantly pretending to be incredibly generationally wealthy, but you entirely conveniently purposefully ignored the devastating fact that you deeply, secretly, utterly defaulted on your massive, heavily refinanced underwater mortgage over a full calendar year ago. The primary lending bank was exactly 3 short days away from sending the armed county sheriff to violently, forcibly, permanently evict you. I secretly stepped in and successfully purchased your massive entire toxic mounting debt directly straight from the angry primary commercial lender exactly 12 long months ago. I legally, officially, fully paid off the massive, crippling financial arrears, in absolute full, and seamlessly transferred the entire primary property title directly into a highly secure private holding company that I completely, personally, entirely own. I initially secretly did it strictly because I foolishly, pathetically still deeply cared about your basic daily well-being back then. So if you actively, aggressively continue to firmly choose to completely side with a guilty federal criminal simply just to superficially maintain your incredibly pathetic, shallow, fake country club elite image, you absolutely eagerly go right exactly ahead. But you all desperately, urgently need to instantly, completely know this one fundamental, indisputable fact very clearly. If I absolutely ever receive one single, solitary, annoying phone call, aggressively demanding or desperately asking me to drop this active legal divorce, I am officially, instantly, aggressively issuing a highly formal, mandatory, strict 30-day legal eviction notice to absolutely every single solitary breathing person currently standing inside of my personal house. I gracefully, calmly, smoothly walked directly out the massive, heavy oak front doors, entirely leaving my utterly broken parents and my completely, thoroughly cowardly older brother totally, permanently trapped deep inside the highly agonizing, devastating, total, absolute ruins of their very own supreme, toxic, shallow, extreme vanity. The silence in the coffee shop was suddenly broken by the sharp ringing of a cell phone. Malik nearly jumped out of his chair as he stared at the caller ID on his own device. It was Brittany. Her name flashed across the screen like a toxic warning signal. Malik's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the phone before he managed to accept the call and press the speaker button. "Malik, where on earth are you?" Brittany's voice shrieked through the small speaker, entirely devoid of her usual artificial southern charm. Her tone was frantic and sharp. "I need you to get back to the house immediately. The FBI is literally parked at the end of our street right now. They are heavily armed and they are pulling out massive boxes of files from my boutique. You need to get over here and explicitly tell them you managed all the primary corporate accounts, just like we aggressively planned." Malik stared at the small burner phone I had just given him and then down at his own device. His face contorted into an ugly expression of sheer, absolute terror. The walls were rapidly closing in around him, and his deeply racist, highly manipulative wife was actively, aggressively trying to shove him directly into the heavy metal jaws of a federal trap. "Brittany, I know what you did." Malik stammered, his voice incredibly weak and totally pathetic. "I know you entirely, completely forged my official signature on the federal tax documents. I know you secretly, completely drained all our joint financial accounts this morning. I know you are desperately planning to flee to Paris tonight with your personal trainer." There was a long, incredibly heavy silence on the other end of the line. The sheer, absolute audacity of her massive betrayal hung heavily in the air. "You spineless, cowardly idiot!" Brittany finally spat. her voice dropping into a vicious, deeply racist sneer. You honestly think anyone is going to believe a pathetic, weak black man over a successful white female boutique owner? I have completely flawlessly, meticulously documented an entire fake paper trail showing you aggressively, forcefully took complete, absolute control of the business finances last year. Donovan fully enthusiastically helped me quietly, actively, legally structure it months ago, just in case the feds ever came loudly knocking. You are going to take the entire absolute fall for this, Malik, because you are too stupid to ever figure a way out of it. She aggressively immediately ended the call. Malik stared helplessly blankly at his phone, the devastating, brutal reality of his entire toxic, completely pathetic life finally crashing heavily down upon him. He had completely, entirely, willingly, enthusiastically sold his own loyal sister directly to a deeply sociopathic, manipulative criminal husband just to actively, desperately maintain his shallow, incredibly pathetic fake luxury lifestyle. And now his incredibly deeply racist, utterly manipulative white wife had flawlessly, actively, aggressively orchestrated his absolute total federal destruction. I am going to prison, Malik whispered, his voice cracking as tears began streaming rapidly down his face. Donovan and Brittany successfully, actively, fully conspired against me, Valerie. They entirely, completely, flawlessly set me up to be the sole, absolute, primary fall guy for the entire massive embezzlement scheme. I checked my expensive watch, my face remaining completely, incredibly, perfectly neutral. You now have exactly 45 minutes, Malik. I stated, my voice entirely, completely void of any basic human sympathy or familial compassion. If you successfully physically manage to desperately sprint through the heavy glass doors of the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office downtown, before your incredibly aggressive, toxic wife successfully, fully, actively executes her international escape plan, they might actually aggressively, eagerly, enthusiastically offer you a highly protective full immunity deal in exchange for all the crucial vital audio evidence securely stored inside that small black burner phone. Malik scrambled desperately to his feet, knocking his velvet chair backward onto the polished hardwood floor. He snatched the burner phone from the table, clutching it like a vital, essential lifeline. He did not even offer a single word of genuine apology or basic, profound familial gratitude. He simply, blindly, desperately sprinted out of the coffee shop into the heavy morning rain, running for his incredibly pathetic, utterly worthless life. I slowly, calmly sipped my cooling espresso, incredibly deeply satisfied by the massive, absolute, devastating, catastrophic implosion of the deeply toxic, manipulative family members who had actively, aggressively, enthusiastically participated in trying to completely, utterly destroy my entire peaceful, incredibly highly successful life. The underground executive parking garage beneath the Aegis Ledger corporate headquarters was a massive cavern of thick gray concrete and cold artificial light. My expensive heels clicked rhythmically against the pristine, swept pavement, echoing loudly in the vast, incredibly empty space. It had been a tremendously long, highly productive day of actively overseeing secure federal software integrations for our new government contracts. I walked slowly toward my private reserved executive parking space, feeling a profound, deeply rooted sense of absolute, undeniable control over my rapidly expanding corporate empire. The cool evening air flowing through the ventilation shafts smelled faintly of expensive synthetic motor oil and damp, polished concrete. As I confidently approached my luxury vehicle, a dark, heavy shadow suddenly violently detached itself from the thick concrete pillar directly beside my reserved parking spot. I did not flinch or instinctively reach into my purse for my phone because I immediately clearly recognized the highly pathetic, slumped silhouette standing weakly in the dim, artificial light. It was Donovan. He looked absolutely nothing like the extremely arrogant, immaculate corporate attorney who had so confidently, maliciously thrown divorce papers at me just a few short weeks ago. His incredibly expensive, bespoke designer suit was deeply, horribly wrinkled and hung loosely, uncomfortably on his rapidly shrinking physical frame. His signature silk tie was completely missing, and the top several buttons of his expensive dress shirt were haphazardly, frantically undone. He had clearly not bothered to shave in several long, agonizing days, and incredibly dark, heavy, swollen bags hung prominently beneath his deeply bloodshot, exhausted eyes. He looked entirely fundamentally broken, and completely, utterly stripped of the artificial legal power and fake elite social status that had continuously fueled his massive, highly toxic ego for his entire adult life. "Valerie, please?" Donovan choked out his dry voice, cracking violently with raw, unfiltered, sheer desperation. He took a very slow, hesitant, weak step toward me, holding his empty hands up high in the air, as if completely surrendering to an armed federal guard. The senior partners completely maliciously locked me out of the main firm building today. They suddenly entirely deactivated my security keycard and aggressively seized my personal company laptop right in front of all the mocking junior associates and paralegals in the busy main lobby. The federal banking investigators systematically, aggressively froze every single solitary personal and business account I have left to my name. I cannot even afford to buy basic cheap groceries right now. Valerie, I am completely, absolutely, thoroughly ruined. I stood perfectly, entirely still and simply watched him completely unravel before my very eyes. I did not feel a single tiny ounce of basic human pity for the massive, devastating, complete financial destruction he had so eagerly, enthusiastically brought upon his own deeply selfish life. "You are currently actively trespassing on highly secure, restricted federal contractor property, Donovan." I stated, my voice entirely, completely flat and thoroughly devoid of any basic foundational human sympathy or concern. Donovan suddenly, shockingly collapsed completely heavily to the hard, cold concrete floor. He dropped directly hard onto his knees right in front of my feet, scraping the fine, delicate fabric of his highly expensive suit trousers against the rough, dirty industrial ground. He bowed his messy, unkempt head and began to weep violently, aggressively. Loud, racking, pathetic sobs echoed loudly, pitifully through the quiet, empty parking garage. It was a highly pathetic, deeply desperate, entirely theatrical display, designed specifically, precisely to aggressively, heavily manipulate my basic fundamental human empathy. "Valerie, I am so incredibly, deeply, hopelessly sorry." He wailed loudly, staring straight up at me, with thick, heavy tears streaming rapidly down his unshaven cheeks. I was completely, entirely, totally out of my mind with extreme work stress. Sasha totally, absolutely, aggressively brainwashed me into doing those terrible, illegal things. She aggressively, maliciously manipulated my deep personal insecurities and constantly filled my vulnerable head with highly toxic, horrible, malicious lies about you and our marriage. She is an incredibly evil, deeply calculating, deceptive woman who purposefully, actively destroyed our beautiful, sacred family. You absolutely know deep down I never ever wanted any of this terrible mess to happen. You know I have always deeply, truly, faithfully loved you from the very beginning. Please, Valerie, you absolutely have to gracefully give me one more chance to completely, permanently fix our broken family. I will eagerly do absolutely anything you possibly want me to do. I will willingly, enthusiastically go to intensive couples therapy. I will formally, permanently quit the toxic law firm today. Just please, I am begging you, do not leave me here to helplessly drown in this terrible federal nightmare. I stared down silently at the pathetic grown man, kneeling weakly on the dirty concrete, begging desperately for his pathetic, ruined life. As I watched the thick, salty tears rolling continuously down his pale cheeks, a very specific, extremely highly vivid, painful memory rushed instantly to the absolute forefront of my focused mind. It was exactly 4 long years ago on a freezing rainy Tuesday morning. My father had just been suddenly frantically rushed into emergency, dangerous open-heart surgery after a massive, highly unexpected, severe cardiac event. I was sitting entirely, completely alone in the bleak, extremely sterile waiting room of Emory University Hospital, feeling completely, utterly terrified that I was about to suddenly lose my beloved dad forever. I had frantically called Donovan's phone, begging him, crying desperately frantically into the receiver, asking him to please come to the busy hospital and simply sit quietly with me while the specialized surgeons continuously operated on my fragile father. Donovan had calmly answered my desperate, tearful phone call from the sunny, comfortable clubhouse of a highly exclusive elite luxury golf course. He sounded deeply, incredibly annoyed that my massive family emergency was rudely interrupting his important weekend morning. He firmly, coldly told me he absolutely could not possibly miss his specifically scheduled morning tea time because he was actively paired with a highly influential, wealthy senior partner who held his future career in his hands. He callously, selfishly, coldly told me that my sick father was currently safely in the capable hands of medical doctors, and his personal presence in a boring waiting room would not magically medically heal a sick old man. He explicitly, willingly chose a simple networking game of recreational golf over physically holding his terrified, weeping wife while her father desperately fought for his fragile life on a cold operating table. He deliberately, intentionally abandoned me and left me to suffer in complete, agonizing, total emotional isolation just so he could casually, happily hit small golf balls with rich, powerful men. That specific terrible day was the exact defining moment, the very last tiny lingering shred of my romantic emotional love for him officially, permanently, completely died forever. Looking directly at him right now, heavily on his knees, shamelessly begging for my powerful legal protection, I felt absolutely nothing but supreme, profound, vast emptiness. You are not crying loudly right now because you deeply miss your loving wife, Donovan. I said, my voice ringing with absolute chilling, perfect clarity in the dark, quiet garage. You are crying entirely because you suddenly completely lost your elite corporate status, your heavily stolen money, and your highly comfortable, incredibly privileged upper-class lifestyle. You are weeping so violently because the federal government is finally systematically holding you strictly, severely accountable for your own massive, arrogant, unadulterated, boundless greed. Sasha absolutely did not brainwash you into committing massive federal wire fraud and stealing client money. She merely enthusiastically provided a highly convenient, clear mirror for your own deeply rotten, incredibly toxic sociopathic narcissism. Donovan reached out desperately, frantically, trying to aggressively grab the soft hem of my expensive winter coat. Please, Valerie, you actually possess the federal power to entirely stop this massive active investigation. You can quietly, legally call off the federal dogs right now. You can miraculously, easily save me from going to a maximum security prison. I took a very slow, deliberate, calculated step backward, keeping my clean clothes entirely safely out of his highly desperate, grasping hands. I reached smoothly, elegantly into my structured black leather designer work bag and slowly, deliberately pulled out a thick, heavy brown manila envelope. Donovan, tear-filled red eyes immediately, quickly lit up with a brief, highly pathetic spark of pure false hope. His incredibly, terribly delusional, arrogant mind actually genuinely believed I was physically handing him a massive financial bailout or a powerful secret legal lifeline. He eagerly, excitedly reached his visibly trembling, weak hands up high to gratefully accept the thick envelope from my firm grasp. I let the heavy, thick package drop directly heavily into his shaking, sweaty palms. That is absolutely not a financial bailout, Donovan, I stated calmly, watching his highly eager, hopeful expression instantly rapidly turn to absolute, total, suffocating dread. That document is the original formal divorce decree you confidently, aggressively threw directly at me on our custom dining room table just weeks ago. You will be absolutely, totally thrilled to clearly know the assigned state family judge fully, completely ratified it early this morning. Our legal marriage is officially, permanently, fully, legally dissolved, completely as of today. Donovan stared blankly, helplessly at the heavy brown envelope, his frantic breathing turning incredibly shallow and painfully rapid. There is a highly important second legal document firmly, tightly stapled right directly behind that signed divorce decree. I continued my steady tone, completely, utterly ruthless, and highly incredibly clinical. That is a formal, massive civil lawsuit officially publicly filed against you today by the elite corporate legal department of Aegis Ledger. My massive artificial intelligence company is currently aggressively suing you for millions of dollars in severe punitive defamation damages. We are actively legally holding you entirely, completely financially responsible for actively, repeatedly spreading highly malicious, incredibly toxic lies about my professional accounting capabilities to your former senior managing partners to purposefully, intentionally stall my professional career. He opened his dry mouth, but absolutely no actual sound came out at all. The sheer, massive, suffocating weight of his complete, permanent, absolute, total destruction physically heavily pressed him down completely against the cold, damp concrete floor. He painfully, silently realized he was not just actively facing terrible federal prison time for massive elite embezzlement, but he was also actively facing a massive, insurmountable total civil bankruptcy from my team of ruthless corporate lawyers. I turned around gracefully and confidently pressed the single button on my keys to smoothly unlock my expensive luxury vehicle. The bright LED headlights flashed incredibly brightly, instantly, fully illuminating his totally pathetic, kneeling, broken figure in the deeply dark, quiet parking garage. "You very loudly, aggressively demanded an open marriage, Donovan," I softly, calmly said smoothly, opening my heavy car door and looking directly back at his utterly, utterly broken physical form one final, absolute time. "Well, your daily schedule is completely, totally wide open now." The gleaming glass and steel tower of Harrison and Wright stood as a massive monument to corporate power in the very heart of Midtown Atlanta. The law firm was the direct and most vicious competitor to Donovan's former employer. In the highly interconnected, incredibly insular world of the Atlanta legal elite, reputation was the only currency that truly mattered. Rumors flowed through these high-rise buildings faster than water, and Sasha was desperately, aggressively trying to outrun the massive federal tsunami she knew was coming. She sat perfectly upright in a plush leather chair inside a sunlit executive office, wearing a highly conservative tailored gray suit that was completely out of character for her usual flashy wardrobe. Sitting directly across from her were two senior hiring partners who were actively reviewing her polished, heavily fabricated resume. Sasha offered them a practiced, demure smile as she smoothly delivered her carefully rehearsed lies. She explained in a soft, convincing tone that she had simply outgrown her paralegal role at Donovan firm. She completely falsely claimed she was actively seeking a much more prestigious, challenging environment to better utilize her brilliant legal mind. She painted a perfect picture of a highly ambitious, dedicated young professional who was willingly, enthusiastically leaving her old firm strictly on her own independent terms. She casually dropped the names of several wealthy clients she had interacted with, deliberately using Donovan's stolen prestige to artificially inflate her own pathetic value. The older male partners nodded approvingly, completely buying into her flawless artificial presentation. They had absolutely no earthly idea that Sasha was currently heavily implicated in a massive, devastating federal wire fraud investigation, or that the incredibly expensive, subtle perfume she was wearing was entirely purchased with stolen client trust money. The senior partners were so incredibly impressed by her fake confidence that they eagerly invited her to briefly tour the firm's state-of-the-art facilities before formally offering her the lucrative position. Sasha stood up and gracefully smoothed her gray skirt, her heart soaring with sheer, unadulterated, malicious triumph. She genuinely actually believed she had successfully outsmarted the entire federal justice system. She truly thought she had completely, flawlessly secured a massive, impenetrable safety net, while Donovan was left behind to burn in the ashes of his own ruined career. She walked proudly down the long, expensive carpeted hallway, flanked by the two powerful men, feeling completely untouchable. The partners proudly guided Sasha toward the massive primary glass-walled boardroom at the very end of the executive corridor. They boasted loudly about how their elite firm was currently aggressively upgrading their entire internal security infrastructure to strictly prevent the exact kind of devastating financial scandals that occasionally destroyed lesser law firms. The heavy glass doors glided open silently. Sasha stepped confidently into the massive room, fully expecting to see a boring standard corporate meeting. Instead, her high heels stopped dead against the expensive plush carpet. The breath was violently, instantly knocked completely out of her lungs. I was standing calmly, authoritatively at the absolute head of the massive polished oak conference table. I wore a pristine, structured white blazer, and my hands were casually resting on the sleek keyboard of my personal laptop. I was already halfway through a highly complex elite software presentation for the entire executive compliance board of Harrison and Wright. Sasha's face instantly, violently drained of absolutely every single drop of blood. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated sheer panic as she stared directly at me. Her hands began to visibly shake at her sides. She desperately wanted to turn around and immediately sprint out of the heavy glass doors. But the two senior hiring partners were standing directly right behind her, completely blocking her only available exit. I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I did not even offer her a single fraction of a meaningful glance. I looked directly through her physical body, as if she were absolutely nothing more than a highly insignificant transparent smudge on the expensive glass wall. My facial expression remained entirely perfectly neutral and chillingly incredibly detached. I smoothly turned my attention back to the captivated board of directors sitting around the massive oak table. I calmly explained that the absolute greatest supreme advantage of the Aegis Ledger artificial intelligence software was its unparalleled unique ability to instantly trace heavily obfuscated financial fragments through multiple dummy accounts in absolute real time. I stated my voice carrying a smooth, heavy, commanding authority that completely dominated the large, quiet room. To adequately effectively demonstrate the incredible raw processing power of our proprietary algorithm, I will seamlessly project a live, active visual sandbox model onto the main viewing screen. I am deliberately using a very recent, highly specific dataset that has officially successfully been cleared for public unclassified federal record as of early this morning. I gracefully tapped a single silver key on my laptop. The massive high-definition presentation screen taking up the entire back wall of the boardroom instantly flashed brilliantly to life. A complex, highly detailed web of glowing digital nodes and sharp connecting red lines rapidly materialized across the enormous display. Sasha let out a tiny, pathetic, breathless whimper as she stared helplessly up at the massive glowing screen. The digital nodes violently aggressively zoomed in, magnifying the heavily buried financial data for the entire room of elite legal minds to perfectly clearly see. Floating right in the absolute dead center of the massive presentation screen, in giant, unmistakable, bold black letters, was Sasha's full legal name. Sitting directly right beneath her name were the exact highly sensitive routing numbers for her personal checking and private savings accounts. The glowing red digital lines systematically, flawlessly traced a massive incoming wire transfer of $200,000 directly originating from the highly secure, compromised escrow accounts of Donovan former law firm. The partners sitting around the table leaned forward in sheer, absolute, stunned silence as the intelligent software continued to aggressively map out the stolen money in real time. A thick red line shot across the massive screen, directly connecting Sasha's bank account to a highly specific diamond dealer in New York City. Another bright red line traced a massive $40,000 payment to an elite luxury residential property group. The final thick glowing line connected directly straight to the exact Midtown Cosmetic Surgery Center, where she had secretly purchased her fake pregnancy body modifications. The entire room was suffocatingly incredibly silent. The overwhelming visual evidence of massive, unadulterated federal fraud was painted across the wall in brilliant, undeniable high-definition color. The two senior hiring partners who had just moments ago been completely, thoroughly charmed by Sasha's fake, professional demeanor slowly turned their heads to look directly at her. Their faces had transformed from warm, welcoming approval to an expression of pure, absolute, total professional disgust and extreme legal horror. In the incredibly small, highly connected, elite corporate world of Atlanta legal society, bringing a known, active federal liability into a prestigious firm was the ultimate, absolute, unforgivable sin. Sasha was no longer a promising young paralegal seeking a better professional opportunity. She was a walking, breathing, massive radioactive federal target who had just brazenly attempted to deeply infiltrate their highly secure, pristine firm. Sasha opened her mouth desperately, frantically trying to formulate some kind of pathetic excuse or believable lie to save her collapsing reality. No sound came out. She looked at me with eyes full of absolute, total, suffocating terror and raw, unfiltered defeat. I did not say a single solitary word to her. I did not need to. I simply maintained my perfectly calm professional posture and smoothly advanced the highly detailed presentation slide to the next data rendering. The senior managing partner sitting at the front of the table did not even hesitate for a single second. He aggressively slammed his hand down on the intercom button resting on the oak table. "Send security to the main executive boardroom immediately," he commanded, his voice ringing with absolute, cold, ruthless authority. "We have a highly severe active trespassing situation that requires immediate physical removal." Sasha began to openly, violently weep. Heavy, thick tears completely ruined her careful, expensive makeup as two large uniformed security guards quickly, forcefully entered the glass room. They grabbed her roughly by both of her arms, totally disregarding her expensive gray suit. They dragged her forcefully backward out of the heavy glass doors, her designer heels scraping loudly, awkwardly against the plush, expensive carpet. I calmly waited for the heavy doors to click completely, securely shut behind her sobbing, pathetic, fading form. I smoothly looked back at the stunned, captivated board of directors. "As you can clearly see, gentlemen," I stated, my voice incredibly steady and entirely perfectly composed, "the Aegis Ledger software leaves absolutely no room for deception. Shall we proceed to the next compliance module?" The heavy frosted glass doors of my executive corporate suite at Aegis Ledger slid open silently. My personal assistant stepped inside and quietly announced that my parents had arrived and were desperately asking for a brief moment of my time. I did not look up from the complex federal audit report I was currently reviewing. I simply nodded my head once, instructing her to send them inside. The atmosphere in the massive sunlit office shifted immediately, the very second my father, Calvin, and my mother walked across the expensive plush carpet. They looked absolutely nothing like the incredibly proud, arrogant socialites who had confidently attempted to ruthlessly blackmail me back at their historic Cascade Heights estate. The fake, superficial country club confidence had been entirely stripped away, leaving two incredibly tired, deeply broken, aging people in its place. My father was wearing a simple, faded sweater instead of his usual tailored golf polo, and his shoulders slumped heavily under the massive, crushing weight of public humiliation. My mother clutched a small leather purse tightly to her chest, her eyes darting nervously around my luxurious office, taking in the undeniable physical proof of my immense corporate power. I closed the federal audit file and calmly folded my hands on top of my sleek glass desk. I did not offer them anything to drink, and I did not stand up to warmly greet them. They slowly, hesitantly took a seat in the two modern guest chairs positioned directly across from me. The silence stretched out for several incredibly long, agonizing minutes. They were completely suffocating in the heavy, toxic ruins of their own disastrous choices. "Valerie, we are so incredibly, deeply sorry." My mother finally whispered, her voice cracking violently as genuine tears began to stream rapidly down her aged face. She did not try to hide her crying or maintain her usual flawless stoic facade. "We were so completely, blindingly wrong about absolutely everything. Malik is officially facing federal trial next month, and Brittany is aggressively testifying against him to secure a lighter sentence for herself. Donovan is completely ruined and facing decades in a federal penitentiary. The entire high society community we spent decades trying to desperately impress has completely turned their backs on us. Our friends will not even return our daily phone calls anymore. My father leaned forward heavily, resting his trembling hands on his knees. He looked directly into my eyes, and for the very first time in my entire life, I saw genuine, profound, raw shame looking back at me. "We completely failed you, Valerie," he said, his deep voice incredibly hollow and entirely defeated. "We enthusiastically placed all of our absolute faith and all of our familial loyalty into people who were completely morally bankrupt just because they looked incredibly successful on the superficial outside. We worshipped Donovan because he was a corporate lawyer with an elite country club membership. We blindly excused Brittany's horrific toxic behavior because we desperately wanted to effortlessly assimilate into her wealthy white circles. We punished you relentlessly for being a quiet, hard-working accountant because your humble background did not fit the flashy, loud definition of black excellence. We were so desperately obsessed with projecting to the world." I sat perfectly still and listened to his pathetic, painful confession. The incredibly deep generational trauma leaking out of his broken words was tragically palpable. My parents had grown up facing severe, brutal economic hardships in the segregated South. They had spent their entire adult lives desperately, aggressively clawing their way into affluent elite social circles, believing that extreme outward proximity to power and status was the only true way to survive and be respected in Atlanta. Their deep-seated trauma had completely, entirely blinded them to the extreme sociopathy of the people they enthusiastically invited into our family. They had willingly sacrificed the mental health and basic safety of their only biological daughter, strictly just to maintain a fragile, completely pathetic illusion of supreme wealth. "I completely understand exactly why you did what you did," I stated, my voice remaining incredibly smooth and thoroughly detached. "You allowed your deep, intense fear of social inadequacy to dictate every single aspect of your parenting. You enthusiastically allowed an abusive, narcissistic man to actively torture me simply because he drove an expensive luxury vehicle and wore custom-tailored suits. You were so incredibly desperate to look successful that you willingly sold your own daughter to a convicted federal criminal." My mother let out a loud, racking sob and buried her face entirely in her trembling hands. "Please, Valerie, we are begging you to somehow forgive us," she pleaded desperately through her heavy tears. "We have absolutely nobody left in this world but you. Malik is going to federal prison and we are completely, entirely isolated. Please come over for Sunday dinner this weekend. Please let us aggressively try to fix this broken family and properly make up for all the terrible, horrible things we willfully ignored." I slowly, calmly reached my right hand down and pulled open the bottom drawer of my heavy glass desk. I smoothly retrieved a thick, crisp legal folder and deliberately placed it directly in the exact center of the table. I slid the heavy document forward until it gently touched the edge of my father's trembling fingers. He looked down at the thick folder in pure, total confusion. He slowly, hesitantly flipped open the heavy blue cover, and his wide eyes instantly darted across the bold black legal text. His mouth fell slightly open in sheer, unadulterated shock as he properly recognized the specific official county seals stamped at the bottom of the crisp page. "That is the absolute master deed to the historic Cascade Heights estate." I explained, my tone completely perfectly, even and thoroughly devoid of any familial emotion. I explicitly legally instructed my private holding company to permanently fully transfer the entire absolute ownership of the massive property directly straight into your personal names this morning. The house is now entirely, completely, 100% yours. There is absolutely no mortgage, no hidden debt, and absolutely no looming threat of county foreclosure. You completely own it, free and clear forever. My mother gasped loudly, looking at the official legal paperwork in pure, absolute disbelief. Her tear-filled eyes looked up at me, shining incredibly brightly, with a massive, sudden spark of profound, desperate hope. She genuinely, truly believed this incredibly generous financial gesture meant I was fully, eagerly accepting her desperate, tearful apology. She honestly thought this massive multi-million-dollar gift meant I was happily officially agreeing to fully permanently reconcile and seamlessly return to playing the role of the dutiful, obedient, loyal daughter. Oh, Valerie, thank you so incredibly much. My mother wept, reaching out desperately, trying to grab my hand across the wide glass desk. We promise things will be entirely, completely different now. We will have beautiful family dinners every single week. We will spend the holidays together. I smoothly, gracefully pulled my hand back, keeping it entirely, completely safely out of her desperate, grasping reach. I stood up slowly from my comfortable leather executive chair and looked deeply down at the two incredibly broken people sitting weakly in my office. You completely misunderstand the exact nature of this transaction, I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy, incredibly absolute whisper. I am not giving you this massive house so we can start having lovely traditional family dinners together. I am officially permanently removing myself from the complex toxic equation of your pathetic lives. I will absolutely never be attending another Sunday dinner at that house. I will not be showing up for Thanksgiving or Christmas. I will never ever answer another desperate, panicked phone call from either of you again for the rest of my natural life. My father's face completely drained of all its sudden hopeful color. He stared up at me, his wide eyes filled with a new profound type of absolute permanent devastation. But Valerie, you just completely saved us, he whispered helplessly. I looked directly into his terrified eyes, my posture perfectly, completely straight and incredibly commanding. I saved you because I refused to let the heavy, toxic burden of your financial ruin weigh on my pristine conscience, I stated with absolute, flawless, chilling finality. I bought your freedom. Now I am claiming mine. The massive concrete architecture of the Richard B. Russell Federal Building loomed over downtown Atlanta like a heavy gray fortress. The morning air was thick with humidity, but the atmosphere inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office was chillingly cold and incredibly sterile. My expensive leather heels clicked softly against the highly polished linoleum floor as an armed federal agent respectfully escorted me toward the primary interrogation conference room. I wore a pristine white tailored suit that perfectly projected absolute authority and total professional detachment. My sophisticated Aegis Ledger laptop was tucked securely under my right arm, containing the exact digital sequence that would permanently, completely end the arrogant existence of the man who had spent a decade trying to systematically destroy my self-worth. Down the long, secure hallway, Donovan marched through the heavy metal security doors alongside his newly hired, incredibly expensive criminal defense attorney. Despite having absolutely all of his personal and business financial accounts aggressively frozen by the federal government, Donovan had somehow managed to procure another flashy, custom-tailored Navy suit. He walked with his chest puffed out and his chin held artificially high, desperately clinging to the pathetic, toxic illusion of elite corporate superiority. He honestly completely believed that this mandatory Department of Justice plea negotiation was simply a minor routine compliance misunderstanding. He genuinely thought he could easily successfully bully and heavily intimidate the federal prosecutors using the exact same aggressive, manipulative courtroom tactics he had always used to completely silence me during our deeply toxic marriage. The federal conference room was exceptionally massive and entirely devoid of any comforting features. Heavy soundproof walls completely isolated the space from the outside world. A long rectangular metal table sat dead in the center, surrounded by stiff, uncomfortable, ergonomic chairs. The lead federal prosecutor, a stern, highly experienced man named Davidson, sat quietly at the absolute head of the table, reviewing a thick stack of printed financial dossiers. He did not stand up or offer a welcoming handshake when Donovan and his expensive defense attorney confidently, aggressively pushed their way into the quiet room. Donovan immediately purposefully took the seat directly across from the lead prosecutor, deliberately spreading his thick legal folders wide across the metal table to artificially establish territorial dominance. He leaned far back in his chair, crossing his legs arrogantly and offering the prosecutor a highly condescending, malicious smile. He completely truly believed he was the absolute smartest, most untouchable legal mind in the entire federal building. Let us completely stop wasting everyone highly valuable time today, Davidson. Donovan began, his deep voice echoing loudly off the bare, soundproof walls, dripping with artificial, unearned confidence. My defense attorney and I are fully prepared to aggressively formally sue your entire department for massive, unprecedented reputational damages. This entire highly ridiculous federal investigation is absolutely nothing more than a pathetic, malicious, vindictive witch hunt entirely orchestrated by my highly unstable, jealous, estranged wife. She is completely bitter about our impending divorce, and she manipulated a highly flawed primitive software system to illegally generate fake auditing anomalies just to temporarily embarrass my prestigious firm. I am officially demanding absolute full executive immunity today and an immediate total unfreezing of all my private bank accounts before we aggressively take this pathetic circus to the national media. The lead federal prosecutor did not flinch. He did not frown or look even remotely intimidated by the massive aggressive legal threats echoing loudly across the quiet room. Davidson simply calmly picked up his black pen and slowly tapped it twice against his thick stack of federal files. He allowed Donovan's massive, unhinged, narcissistic delusion to completely heavily hang in the cold, sterile air for several long, agonizing minutes. The suffocating silence was deliberately designed to strip away the artificial corporate armor Donovan was desperately trying to wear. The expensive defense attorney shifted highly uncomfortably in his metal chair, clearly suddenly realizing that the federal prosecutor was absolutely not buying a single solitary word of their aggressive intimidation strategy. You fundamentally completely misunderstand the precise, exact nature of this federal meeting, Donovan. Davidson finally stated, his voice dropping to a low, smooth, incredibly dangerous professional register. The United States Department of Justice absolutely never negotiates active plea deals based on petty matrimonial disputes or local firm gossip. We only explicitly, confidently move forward with federal indictments when we already actively, exclusively possess absolute, undeniable, irrefutable mathematical proof of extreme corporate criminal activity. You are not sitting in that chair today to aggressively bargain for total executive immunity. You are sitting in that chair today because we are graciously, benevolently offering you exactly one single, highly brief opportunity to formally plead guilty before we legally, forcefully request a maximum 30-year sentence for massive federal wire fraud and elite corporate racketeering. Donovan let out a loud, incredibly harsh, patronizing laugh, waving his hand dismissively through the cold indoor air. You have absolutely zero actual concrete proof of any wire fraud, Davidson. Donovan countered, his voice rising in sheer, arrogant defiance. You blindly relied entirely, completely on my highly emotional, bitter wife, little amateur bookkeeping firm to run a deeply flawed basic compliance sweep. Her basic accounting software could not possibly successfully penetrate the highly secure, encrypted firewall architecture of my elite firm internal trust network. You have absolutely nothing but circumstantial, fabricated garbage. Davidson slowly leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the cold metal table. He offered Donovan a very small, tight, utterly predatory professional smile. You are entirely, absolutely correct about one specific thing, Donovan. Davidson calmly, smoothly agreed. We absolutely did heavily rely on an external, independent federal contractor to meticulously, securely execute this highly complex forensic audit. However, you are completely, totally, catastrophically incorrect about the specific capabilities of their highly advanced, proprietary artificial intelligence architecture. In fact, the primary architect and lead forensic expert of that elite contracting firm is serving as our chief cooperating federal witness for this massive prosecution. She graciously volunteered to personally attend this specific meeting today to directly, intimately walk you through the absolute, total, unmitigated destruction of your entire criminal defense strategy. The lead federal prosecutor slowly, deliberately turned his head and respectfully gestured toward the heavy, dark-tinted glass door connecting the main conference room to the private federal observation deck. The electronic lock clicked loudly, echoing sharply, like a gunshot in the silent room. I smoothly, gracefully pushed the heavy door open and confidently stepped completely out of the dark shadows and directly into the harsh, bright, fluorescent light of the federal interrogation room. My pristine white suit practically glowed against the dark gray walls. I walked with slow, highly deliberate, measured steps, completely commanding the absolute total focus of every single breathing person in the entire massive room. Donovan's arrogant, triumphant smile instantly, violently froze entirely solid on his rapidly paling face. His dark eyes widened in pure, absolute, unadulterated sheer panic as he watched me slowly, calmly place my sophisticated Aegis Ledger laptop directly onto the cold metal table right beside the lead federal prosecutor. His mouth hung slightly open, but his paralyzed vocal cords absolutely totally refused to successfully produce a single solitary sound. I did not sit down. I remained standing perfectly straight, incredibly tall, looking deeply directly down into the terrified, shattered eyes of the man who had spent a decade desperately, aggressively trying to convince me I was completely small, boring, and fundamentally worthless. I slowly, casually opened the sleek silver lid of my advanced laptop and confidently typed in my secure federal encryption sequence. The massive high-definition presentation screen mounted on the back wall of the federal conference room instantly brightly flashed to life. A highly complex, explicitly detailed digital map of heavily encrypted global bank transfers instantly materialized in brilliant, sharp red and white colors. I offered Donovan an incredibly slow, chilling, perfectly composed, devastating professional smile. "Hello, Donovan," I said, my smooth, icy voice completely, utterly dominating the absolute total silence of the entire federal room. "Let us closely, intimately, meticulously talk about the exact specific $4.2 million you deliberately, illegally, aggressively routed directly through the Cayman Islands. Shell accounts exactly 3 days before you filed those divorce papers." Donovan's entire physical body violently gave out. His shaking, weak knees completely failed him, and he collapsed incredibly heavily backward, entirely, completely shattering into a stiff metal chair. His arrogant, toxic criminal world finally, permanently, fatally burning to absolute, total, devastating, unrecoverable ash all around him. The expensive defense attorney stared at the glowing high-definition presentation screen, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic financial evidence suddenly illuminating the dark federal conference room. His expensive leather briefcase slipped slightly from his trembling hands, landing with a soft, dull thud against the cold metal leg of the interrogation table. Donovan remained entirely slumped in his stiff chair, his chest rising and falling in erratic, panicked, shallow gasps as he stared helplessly at the brilliant red digital lines mapping out his absolute total financial ruin. I did not wait for either of them to catch their breath. I gracefully tapped the sleek silver spacebar on my laptop, immediately advancing the highly detailed digital rendering to the next undeniable set of catastrophic criminal data. The screen violently shifted, displaying a complex web of corporate wire transfers, perfectly linking Donovan's primary legal escrow accounts directly to a series of fraudulent offshore holding companies. "You meticulously designed a highly sophisticated digital funnel, Donovan." I explained, my voice echoing with pure, chilling clinical precision across the silent, soundproof federal room. "You systematically drained precisely $4.2 million from 3 of your most vulnerable corporate clients over a span of exactly 18 months. You arrogantly assumed that simply routing the stolen capital through 3 different international shell corporations would successfully wash the digital fingerprints completely clean. However, my advanced artificial intelligence algorithm actively monitors cross-border financial latency, and it flagged your highly repetitive deposit patterns almost immediately." The lead federal prosecutor, Davidson, leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on the cold metal table, his sharp eyes locked intensely on my glowing digital presentation. He allowed me to completely dictate the entire flow of the supreme federal interrogation, I smoothly, confidently transitioned the visual data dashboard to isolate a very specific cluster of domestic bank transfers. Let us bring this massive federal fraud directly back home to Atlanta, I stated calmly, looking directly down into Donovan. Absolutely terrified, bloodshot eyes. The software brilliantly perfectly traced exactly $150,000 of your stolen client funds, routing directly into the primary business accounts of a heavily failing local retail boutique. A boutique entirely owned and operated by your highly racist, highly manipulative sister-in-law, Brittany. You deliberately, purposefully used my spineless older brother and his toxic wife as your personal, ignorant money mules, heavily funding their fake luxury lifestyle to aggressively, effectively launder your stolen federal cash right under my nose. Donovan opened his dry mouth desperately, frantically trying to formulate some kind of pathetic legal defense, but his vocal cords completely failed him. His defense attorney frantically started furiously scribbling messy, unreadable notes on his yellow legal pad, his face turning an incredibly sickly shade of pale gray. I tapped another single key on my sophisticated keyboard, completely ignoring their escalating internal panic. The massive wall screen brilliantly flashed again instantly, bringing up highly detailed classified medical billing records and property deeds. And then there is the incredibly pathetic matter of your deeply loyal, heavily modified paralegal mistress. I continued, my tone dropping to a smooth, icy, incredibly ruthless whisper. My elite forensic tracking seamlessly, perfectly isolated the exact $200,000 you violently, illegally ripped from your firm internal trust ledgers to aggressively, artificially fund Sasha's entirely fabricated pregnancy. The digital footprint undeniably explicitly proves you directly financed her extensive luxury cosmetic surgery, her expensive shiny new diamond necklace, and the massive down payment on her flashy new midtown townhouse using stolen federal capital. The lead prosecutor, Davidson, finally spoke, his deep voice booming with absolute terrifying federal authority. Your complete arrogance is genuinely staggering, Donovan, Davidson stated coldly, writing a single harsh checkmark on his official government file. You blatantly stole millions of dollars from highly wealthy, powerful corporate clients to eagerly, enthusiastically fund your own pathetic, sordid personal affairs, while actively, aggressively attempting to officially buy your highly coveted senior partnership seat using entirely, totally fraudulent financial disclosures. I smoothly guided my sophisticated software to the final, most devastating digital slide of the entire federal presentation. A massive, perfectly clear document materialized on the bright wall screen displaying Donovan highly confidential internal partnership loan application. You arrogantly, maliciously told me you desperately, strictly needed my spousal consent signature to successfully legally secure a massive $2 million commercial loan for your elite firm promotion. I explained, watching Donovan's entire physical body violently tremble with sheer, unadulterated cold terror. But my intelligent software easily, seamlessly uncovered the absolute hidden truth. You never actually needed a traditional commercial bank loan at all, Donovan. You needed my pristine, highly respected corporate financial signature simply just to act as the ultimate unsuspecting legal guarantor for your massive, completely illegal offshore equity transfers. You aggressively tried to blindly, legally bind my perfectly clean personal financial assets directly to your incredibly dirty, toxic stolen money, so that if the federal government ever came loudly knocking, I would take the entire catastrophic, devastating fall for your massive elite corporate racketeering. Donovan let out a loud, miserable, highly pathetic whimpering sound, entirely, completely burying his pale, sweating face deeply into both of his trembling hands. The undeniable, absolute mathematical perfection of my forensic digital audit had completely, entirely trapped him in a flawless, inescapable, massive federal cage. Every single solitary stolen dollar, every fake luxury purchase, every toxic, malicious manipulation was now permanently, perfectly, brightly exposed on the official active federal legal record. The incredibly expensive criminal defense attorney slowly, deliberately set his silver pen down onto the cold metal table. He took a very deep, heavy, ragged breath and slowly closed his thick, black leather briefcase with a loud, definitive, authoritative snap. He did not look at the glowing presentation screen anymore, and he absolutely, entirely, completely refused to look directly at the federal prosecutor. The attorney leaned heavily over, closing the physical distance between himself and his completely ruined, absolutely devastated client. I am officially, formally, aggressively advising you to immediately, enthusiastically plead guilty to absolutely every single solitary federal charge they put in front of you today. The lawyer whispered, his voice echoing sharply, clearly in the perfectly quiet, soundproof room. You have absolutely no viable legal defense, Donovan. Your entire financial reality is completely, mathematically, undeniably destroyed. Donovan slowly, weakly lifted his tear-stained, terrified face from his shaking hands. He looked directly up at me, his dark eyes utterly, completely shattered, entirely stripped of every single tiny ounce of his former towering, toxic corporate vanity. The heavy metal security doors at the back of the massive federal conference room suddenly, aggressively clicked open. Two tall, broad-shouldered, highly heavily armed federal agents marched purposefully, briskly into the sterile cold room, holding a thick set of heavy silver steel handcuffs. They walked directly straight up to Donovan's chair, completely ignoring his pathetic, whimpering tears. Donovan, you are formally, officially under active federal arrest for exactly 14 separate counts of massive federal wire fraud, elite, corporate embezzlement, and severe international money laundering. The lead federal agent barked loudly, aggressively, pulling Donovan's limp, pathetic arms firmly, securely behind his trembling back. The heavy steel cuffs clicked loudly, permanently, securely, locking into place, echoing with supreme, chilling finality across the quiet room. The morning news anchors across Atlanta were having an absolute field day with the spectacular collapse of Donovan's legal career. I sat comfortably in my corner office at Aegis Ledger, sipping a hot matcha latte while watching the flat-screen television mounted on my wall. The local broadcast flashed a highly unflattering, high-definition mugshot of my former husband. Donovan looked completely, totally hollowed out on the harsh television screen. His pristine, tailored suits were replaced by a harsh, bright orange federal jumpsuit. His arrogant corporate smirk was permanently erased, leaving behind only the terrified, exhausted expression of a totally broken man facing a brutal 15 years in a highly guarded, maximum security federal penitentiary. The social media reaction was incredibly swift and merciless. The very same elite country club members who had enthusiastically judged my accounting career were now aggressively distancing themselves from Donovan's toxic fallout. Prestigious law firm partners and corporate executives immediately scrubbed all digital evidence of ever knowing him. They released highly polished public relations statements fiercely condemning his financial crimes and pretending they were completely shocked by his illegal behavior. The sheer hypocrisy of the Atlanta elite was perfectly displayed. They had happily turned a blind eye to his blatant narcissism and emotional abuse simply because he was a lucrative asset. But the second he became a massive federal liability, they threw him directly to the wolves without hesitation. The catastrophic legal dominoes continued to violently fall throughout the busy month. Brittany's highly publicized federal tax fraud trial concluded with a rapid, brutal efficiency that absolutely shattered her lifelong, impenetrable bubble of extreme white privilege. She had walked into the federal courtroom wearing a conservative designer dress, crying heavy fake tears, genuinely believing that the wealthy judicial system would simply give her a light slap on the wrist. She honestly thought her tears and social status would magically save her from facing any real concrete consequences for blatantly stealing federal money. The stern federal judge completely disagreed. He handed Brittany a mandatory sentence of 3 years in a federal women correctional facility. I watched the live courtroom feed as the heavy steel handcuffs clicked around her wrists. She violently screamed and thrashed against the stoic armed bailiffs, completely losing her polished Southern Belle facade. She loudly begged Malik to save her. But my cowardly brother had already secured his own immunity deal by actively handing the federal prosecutors every single piece of damning evidence they needed. Malik walked free from prison, but he was utterly financially bankrupt and socially exiled from the wealthy community he had sacrificed his own sister to impress. Sasha attempted to cleverly negotiate her own desperate survival by eagerly turning state's evidence against Donovan. She sat in the federal witness box for 3 agonizing days, completely spilling every single toxic, dirty detail of his massive, intricate money laundering operations. She willingly, eagerly traded her older, abusive lover for a heavily reduced probation sentence, genuinely believing she could effortlessly walk away from the smoking wreckage and seamlessly restart her ambitious legal career. She was entirely catastrophically wrong. The tight-knit insular legal community in Atlanta operated on strict codes of implicit trust and unshakable reputation. Sasha had publicly officially branded herself as a massive federal liability who enthusiastically helped steal millions of dollars from vulnerable, innocent clients. Every single prominent law firm, boutique legal agency, and corporate compliance office in the state of Georgia instantly permanently blacklisted her resume. She was rendered completely unemployable in the legal field. The last credible rumor I heard circulating through my corporate network was that she was desperately struggling to find basic minimum wage employment at local retail stores, entirely stripped of her fake, stolen luxury lifestyle. The quiet peace of my new, highly successful independent life was briefly, unexpectedly interrupted exactly 4 months after Donovan official federal sentencing. My executive assistant walked gracefully into my sunlit office and gently placed a crumpled, slightly dirty white envelope directly onto my glass desk. The return address, stamped aggressively in dull black ink in the upper left corner, belonged to a highly secure federal correctional facility located in rural Alabama. I calmly picked up the cheap envelope and sliced it open with a silver letter opener. The lined yellow paper inside was heavily covered in Donovan messy, frantic handwriting. The letter was a pathetic, lengthy, rambling manifesto of pure, miserable desperation. He spent 4 long pages crying pitifully about the harsh, freezing conditions of his tiny concrete cell. He complained miserably about the terrible, bland food and the highly hostile, dangerous inmates who constantly physically intimidated him. The entire letter culminated in a highly desperate begging request for basic financial mercy. Donovan shamelessly begged me to permanently deposit $500 a month into his federal prison commissary account so he could buy basic hygiene supplies and decent snacks. He claimed we were once a happy family, and I absolutely fundamentally owed him basic human compassion in his darkest, most terrifying hour of need. I sat perfectly still, looking at the desperate words scribbled heavily on the yellow paper. My mind instantly flashed back to a dark, freezing, rainy morning exactly 6 years ago. My transmission had completely failed on the crowded interstate, leaving me terrified and stranded on the dangerous, narrow highway shoulder. I called Donovan, crying desperately, begging him to drive 10 short minutes to safely pick me up. He coldly answered his phone from a warm luxury car dealership while finalizing the lease on his brand new expensive Mercedes. He heartlessly told me my broken car was absolutely not his personal problem, and I was severely inconveniencing his busy, highly important day. I slowly picked up my expensive black ink pen. I did not write a long emotional response. I did not offer him a single ounce of closure or basic human sympathy. I simply pressed the smooth tip of the pen directly against the bottom of his pathetic, desperate letter and carefully wrote one single, solitary, undeniable word across the cheap yellow paper. Uber. I neatly folded the yellow paper back into its original cheap envelope. I quickly resealed the flap and wrote "Return to sender" directly across the front in large, clear, undeniable letters. I handed the envelope back to my assistant and gracefully returned to building my empire completely, leaving him to slowly, permanently rot in the cold, dark, heavy federal prison of his own making. The grand ballroom at the Waldorf Astoria in the heart of Buckhead was entirely transformed for the inaugural Aegis Ledger Philanthropic Gala. The atmosphere in the massive, elegant room was absolutely, completely different from any heavily suffocating charity event I had ever forcefully attended. There were no flashy, superficial floral arrangements masking deep-seated generational insecurities. There were no desperate social climbers aggressively fighting for the brief, fleeting attention of corrupt corporate lawyers. The vast, beautiful space was currently filled with genuine titans of industry, highly respected federal judges, and brilliant leading technology innovators who had traveled from across the country, specifically just to attend my exclusive corporate event. I stood near the center of the massive room wearing an immaculate emerald green architectural gown that perfectly commanded absolute total respect. The expensive heavy silk fabric draped flawlessly across my confident frame, projecting an aura of quiet, untouchable authority. I was fully proudly embracing my rightful position as a highly powerful elite corporate chief executive officer without a single solitary ounce of lingering fear or polite hesitation. I smoothly, gracefully navigated through the crowded, elegant ballroom, feeling an incredible, profound sense of absolute, pure peace. Nobody in this massive, beautiful room was whispering maliciously behind crystal champagne flutes. Nobody was looking down on my professional background or quietly judging my absolute lack of a traditional, highly toxic fake family unit. Instead, a large group of highly respected federal cybersecurity experts and senior Department of Justice officials were actively, eagerly leaning in to carefully hear my unique expert perspective on advanced predictive financial modeling. My fierce, brilliant divorce attorney, Diane, who was now officially serving as a highly valued senior corporate board member for my rapidly expanding software company, stood proudly nearby. She was sharing a genuine, warm, happy laugh with the lead federal prosecutor, Davidson. They were openly enthusiastically discussing the massive, lucrative new security contracts our joint task force was currently actively preparing to aggressively roll out across the entire eastern seaboard next quarter. The undeniable, absolute mathematical supremacy of my proprietary software had completely, entirely, permanently revolutionized the entire federal legal compliance landscape and securely cemented my absolute total dominance in the global corporate sphere. The gentle, elegant chime of a silver spoon, tapping against a crystal glass, signaled the immediate beginning of the formal evening presentations. I walked confidently, purposefully, up the carpeted stairs to the brightly lit main podium to deliver my highly anticipated inaugural keynote address. I looked out over the sea of highly supportive, intelligent faces, and I did not speak a single solitary word about maintaining shallow appearances or preserving fragile, toxic family legacies. Instead, I proudly, formally announced the official immediate launch of a massive $10 million educational endowment, fully, permanently funded, directly by Aegis Ledger Incorporated. I explicitly, clearly explained that the new, powerful, charitable foundation was specifically strictly designed to aggressively provide advanced elite forensic accounting and complex software engineering scholarships exclusively for brilliant young Black women across the entire city of Atlanta. I spoke passionately, deeply about how ultimate absolute financial literacy and supreme technological mastery are the absolute greatest impenetrable shields against severe domestic economic abuse and highly toxic male financial manipulation. The entire massive, elegant ballroom instantly erupted into a deafening, incredibly powerful, unified standing ovation that vibrated deeply, intensely through the heavy, polished floorboards. I stepped down from the bright stage, feeling an overwhelming, massive surge of pure, unadulterated, absolute triumph. The heavy, eager crowd instantly swarmed the podium, desperate to speak directly with the new undisputed queen of the Atlanta corporate technology sector. Major global news networks had securely set up their heavy broadcast cameras at the very back of the room, broadcasting my historic philanthropic announcement on live national television. Young, eager software engineering students from local prestigious universities were already aggressively, enthusiastically lining up at the Aegis Ledger recruitment tables we had strategically positioned near the grand entrance. My secure corporate phone buzzed repeatedly, constantly in my silk clutch with incoming massive multi-million-dollar contract offers from various independent international government agencies who had just witnessed my flawless, highly public federal presentation. The massive elite corporate empire I had quietly, secretly, meticulously built in the dark shadows was now permanently, completely, successfully, aggressively operating in the brightest, most undeniable, brilliant public light. I smoothly, quietly slipped out through the heavy glass doors leading to the expansive private outdoor terrace, needing a brief, quiet moment to fully absorb the massive, immense scale of my new, beautiful reality. The warm, gentle Atlanta night air felt incredibly refreshing and wonderfully clean against my bare skin. The glowing, beautiful city skyline stretched out endlessly in every single direction, perfectly representing absolute, boundless, unlimited future opportunity and pure massive growth. I walked slowly, carefully to the edge of the sleek glass balcony, resting my hands lightly on the cool, smooth, expensive metal railing. I looked deeply down at the busy, vibrant city streets below, completely, entirely marveling at the incredible, profound, massive, beautiful distance between the terrified, quiet woman I used to be and the incredibly powerful, untouchable billionaire I had joyfully, enthusiastically finally become. Soft, steady, incredibly confident footsteps approached me from behind, walking slowly, quietly onto the peaceful, quiet terrace. A tall, handsome, highly intelligent man stepped gently into the soft, warm, ambient light of the balcony. It was Julian, the brilliant, highly ethical venture capitalist who had recently successfully enthusiastically partnered with Aegis Ledger on a massive, lucrative international software expansion project. He was wearing a classic, immaculate, dark tailored suit, and he carried two tall crystal flutes of incredibly expensive vintage champagne gently in his strong hands. He respected my fierce intellect deeply, profoundly, and he never ever attempted to artificially aggressively overshadow my powerful physical presence in any room. He gently, respectfully offered me one of the elegant, bubbling glasses standing at a highly comfortable, safe, purely polite distance. He did not look at me with toxic, ravenous greed or shallow, pathetic, predatory intent. He looked at me with genuine, absolute, profound awe and deep, purely professional, respectful admiration. Julian turned his head slightly, looking out at the sprawling, bright, beautiful city lights, and then turned his warm, intelligent, dark eyes directly toward my face. He softly, gently asked how I had possibly managed to successfully, gracefully navigate such an incredibly devastating, brutal personal storm with such absolute, flawless, perfect grace and total unmatched clinical precision. I took a very slow, calm, deep sip of the crisp, cold, expensive champagne, letting the sweet bubbles dance lightly, briefly across my tongue. I slowly, smoothly turned my head away from the glowing skyline and looked directly straight forward, piercing completely perfectly through the crisp, clean night air. A slow, highly knowing, deeply, profoundly satisfied smile spread perfectly beautifully across my relaxed face. The absolute greatest fatal mistake a desperate toxic narcissist can ever possibly make is blindly aggressively handing a complex calculator to the very same quiet woman who silently, meticulously holds every single one of their heavy federal receipts. I stated my voice incredibly smooth, perfectly calm, and ringing with supreme, absolute, flawless, gorgeous finality. I did not maliciously destroy him, Julian. I simply meticulously, flawlessly audited the math. The greatest lesson I learned from this entire ordeal is that true power does not ever need to be loud or flashy. Toxic narcissists will always heavily underestimate you because they only value superficial status and completely ignore quiet resilience. When people try to aggressively break you down and manipulate your reality, you should never beg for their validation or scream for basic respect. You simply need to quietly, meticulously gather your undeniable evidence, build your own unshakable financial independence, and let their own massive lies entirely consume their lives. True ultimate justice is just letting the math speak perfectly. If you have ever had to quietly outsmart a toxic partner or manipulative family member, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know your story in the comments below.